Welcome, new and old friends. I just have a couple things to say, and then the stories will begin. Before you drift off into the dream realm, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. If you'd like to find out about my social links, my website, how to help the channel, check the description box. Now turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. It's time to dream. The Haunting of Hotel Nema by Trick Organization 42. Once upon a time, in a small town shrouded in darkness, there lived a young boy named Ethan. Tragedy had struck his life when the devastating fire engulfed his family's home, leaving him as the sole survivor. Haunted by the memories of that fateful night, Ethan was determined to find his family, or at least some answers, in the eerie Hotel Nema. Rumors whispered through the town about the hotel's sinister past, but Ethan's desperation overshadowed any fear he felt. Armed with a flickering flashlight and a heavy heart, he stepped into the hotel's dimly lit lobby. The air was thick with unsettling silence, as if the walls themselves held secrets. As Ethan ascended to the first floor, he noticed peculiar paintings lining the hallway, each portrait depicting a family, their eyes hollow and their smiles twisted into sinister grins. Unease crept up his spine, but he pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. On the second floor, the atmosphere grew colder, and the flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Ethan's heart raced as he stumbled upon a dusty room filled with old photographs. To his horror, he recognized his own face in each picture, but the people surrounding him were strangers. Confusion and fear consumed him, but he couldn't turn back now. With trembling hands, Ethan reached the third floor, where the air grew heavy with suffocating darkness. The sound of distant whispers echoed through the corridor, sending chills down his spine. As he cautiously opened a creaking door, he found himself in a room filled with mirrors. But these mirrors were different. They reflected not his physical appearance, but his deepest fears and insecurities. The fourth floor beckoned Ethan with a foreboding presence. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the floorboards groaned beneath his weight. In a room at the end of the hallway, he discovered a dusty journal. Its pages were filled with his own handwriting, detailing his darkest thoughts and secrets. Panic consumed him as he realized that someone had been watching him, documenting his every move. Summoning every ounce of courage, Ethan ascended to the fifth and final floor. The air grew thick with malevolence, and the flickering lights cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls. In a room at the end of the hallway, he found a locked door. Desperation fueled his determination, and he searched for a key. Finally, in a forgotten corner, Ethan discovered a rusty key hidden beneath a decaying carpet. With trembling hands, he unlocked the door, revealing a room filled with photographs of his family. Tears streamed down his face as he realized the truth. His family had perished in the fire that claimed their home. But the horror didn't end there. As Ethan turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the cracked mirrors. His eyes were hollow, his smile twisted into a sinister grin. The hotel had consumed him, revealing the darkness that lay dormant within his soul. In that moment, Ethan understood the hotel was not just a place of nightmares, but a manifestation of his own inner demons. He had not only lost his family, but also himself in his relentless pursuit of answers. Trapped within the hotel's walls, he would forever wander, a ghostly reminder of the horrors that lurked within. I was a horrible person to my mother-in-law, and 3 years ago on her deathbed, she cursed me and swore she would pay me back from the afterlife. Today, my 2.5-year-old daughter inquisitively asked me, "Hey, Dad, remember when I was the older one and you were the young mean one?" Church Road by Panterium. Being a rookie, you come across the usual hazing you would get from the local police, but this place I was transferred to from the city was a big change being a small town, so it wasn't that kind of place to haze. The officers I worked with and the friends I made were all pretty laid back, and I hate to say this, but lazy, and weren't really police at all. Not because of their laziness. I couldn't blame them for that. It was the fact that the town I landed in was awfully quiet with nothing really going on. Really nice town folk with no grudges to outsiders. Welcoming with open arms, which was kind of creepy at first, but I guess I was just used to getting mean-eyed by city people for the first 3 years of being an officer. So my first month being here didn't feel like a job at all. The usual calls would be about escaped animals from a barn or punk kids hanging around late at night getting drunk. Nothing violent at all, which was nice pace, but very much boring. October 31st was something I hadn't experienced here, and what I was told, the kids liked to hang around this old road. Church Road it was called. It was this one road that led to an old abandoned funeral home, which was basically a mansion. One road in, one road out, and not to mention the bridge that you would have to cross on to get to the funeral home. It was basically an island with rough waters that not even a canoe would get anyone near it, which was a good thing. So Halloween night, I was posted at the edge of Church Road, just at the bridge, which was surrounded by old dead trees, and yeah, it was pretty eerie since all the other trees before Church Road were covered with leaves. It was literally like a wasteland of thick blackness all the way down the road, and I could see why the young ones would want to hang around here for a thrill. I sat around the bridge, keeping an eye open, and turned away a few kids trying to pass by, but other than that, nothing much happening. I had begun to fall asleep in the car, which I couldn't let happen, so I decided to step out and stretch my legs and have a cigarette just to pass the time. I sat on the back of the trunk facing down this creepy wooden bridge and could see down the road almost clearly. A few street lamps leading to the mansion, which was barely visible with the wind howling slightly, like something straight out of a horror movie. I scoffed at the idea of something creepy happening and imagined someone walking towards me from across the bridge and gave myself the creeps. I shook my head and flicked my cigarettes, laughing off my nervousness, and turned to walk back to the driver's side door. Just as I put my hand on the handle, I took one last look through my peripheral vision and could actually see a figure walking at the end of the bridge. I quickly pulled out my flashlight and sighed, thinking one of the punk kids managed to get by me. I started walking towards this person as they walked closer and yelled, "Come on, you can't be out here, it's not safe. Now get back to this side and get home," shining my flashlight down on the wet wooden beams below my feet and shining it up towards the person. "You mind? That's a little bright." I pointed the light downwards and approached the person, and we both stopped in the middle of the bridge. "Cold night, isn't it?" the person says, and I nod my head in agreement. "Yeah, it really is. But sir, you can't be here. These premises are off limits at all times. We get too many vandals and such around this time." The person stared at me with a confused gaze. "Oh, is that right? But I live just up this road. I haven't seen any vandals around." I looked at him confused myself and looked around. "Sir, no one has lived around here for years, especially not at the funeral home, and I'm pretty sure that's the only place around here for miles." The man smiles and turns his head as I turn my head behind me, hear another car pull up, and I see another deputy arriving. "Can you come with me and we'll talk to my friend over here and sort this out?" The man nods his head and we both walk towards the car coming around the corner, and we stop as he stops right in front of us. I wave my flashlight as I look at him through the windshield and he gestures at me hastily as he rolls down his window. "Get in the car now!" I look at him confused. What is it? I turn to look at the man who walked beside me to see what he was giving as a reaction, but as you guess what had happened, he was gone. I panicked and quickly got in the car and we drove off, leaving my car behind and didn't bother to look back. The whole drive back to town was the scariest silence I had ever experienced and didn't bother to ask what had happened because even so, I was still in disbelief about the whole thing. When we got back to the station, I went straight in and locked up my belt and such in my locker and clocked out. The deputy that picked me up sat at his desk and threw an old picture on the desk without saying a word. I leaned down to see the same man who I was talking to and, well, I just couldn't comprehend the situation. The deputy looked at me with the straightest face and rested his hands on the table. "I see you met my grandfather." I looked at him and shook my head. "I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing happened." He smirked. "My grandfather was one of the last people to own that funeral home. It was in my family for the longest time, but for some reason, people went missing on that island. Not only people, but the bodies of the dead as well. So, it was shut down and my grandfather apparently even made it out himself. Something went on there, but no one really knows what happened and no one wants to find out because they're afraid they'll go missing. So next time, maybe if you are posted or have to go there, stay off the bridge." I took a deep breath and agreed to his warning, and it was at that moment I found out the dark history about this quiet town. Maybe that was why it was so quaint. A few times after that, I had to escort a few of the kids off the road, but I never crossed the bridge myself because of the fear of seeing that man again. Other than that, I never took the night shift of the church road ever again. I squeezed my wife's hand as the image of triplets appeared on the sonogram's monitor. "Mr. Jones, I really don't know what to say," the doctor exclaimed, while my wife smiled, pupils narrowing, and I gripped my distended belly. Don't Go Into Impossible Houses by Dr. Blackjack 21. With Halloween season approaching, I decided to get this warning out to everyone I could reach. If you ever come across a haunted house that shouldn't be there, don't go inside. This haunted house pops up between two other houses you already know. It won't be squeezed in like someone built a new house in the middle of these two plots, but rather, it'll be fit in like the whole place was designed that way. It'll be like the street had already been a few hundred feet longer than you remember. If such a house appears out of nowhere, do not approach it, do not knock on the door, and whatever you do, do not cross the threshold. Once you do, your fate is sealed. Unfortunately, no one gave me this warning when I was a kid. Maybe it was new, or perhaps there just weren't many survivors back then. Whatever the case, no one warned me. So when I went up, knocked on the door, and shouted, "Trick or treat!" I did not listen to the small doubt in the back of my mind that told me to run away. Now, every year I have to go back to that living nightmare. After all, I'm on the expected guest list now. And if you don't show up at the haunted house on Halloween night, the house comes looking for you. And from what I've heard, it's much, much worse if you force its hand. The years have somewhat blurred together, but I still remember the first time all too well. I sometimes curse myself for not listening to my doubts when I walked up to that place. But, to be fair, as well decked out as this house was, any kid would expect a bag full of loot. The owner clearly went all out. There were realistic tombstones out front of open graves with the names like Timmy and John dated for that very day. Some people in spooky costumes carried body bags out to fill some of the graves as I walked up. I even remember wondering how often they pulled the bodies back out to repeat this show for trick-or-treaters like me. When you knock on the door, a man that I named the ringleader in my head opens the door and invites you inside. Any sane person would probably take one look at the guy, turn around, and walk away. He looked like someone stapled skin directly onto a skeleton, with no thought of where muscular or fat should exist. His eyes looked like they were so loose in his sockets that if he leaned too far forward, they'd just fall out and roll around on the ground. His teeth were yellowed and broken enough to give any dentist nightmares for weeks to come. He wore a baggy, faded suit complete with long tails and a top hat. On your first visit, the ringleader will ask you the same question you probably heard 1,000 times before. And what are you supposed to be? This is actually one of the few breaks the house gives you. You see, you get one benefit based on what you are. For example, if you say you're a pirate or a ninja, that cheap plastic sword you came in will become real. A dragon might actually get claws and scales and so on. At the time, you might think this is cool, but it's really just a chance for the house to make the game more sporting. And if you manage to survive, you'll be the same thing every time you return until you finally lose the game. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. What were you dressed as when you showed up? Honestly, I don't remember. This may seem like it doesn't make sense, but let me explain. You see, while the other kids around me were shouting things like, "I'm a soldier," or "I'm a princess," I just stood there, frozen in fear. The part of my brain that should have kept me from crossing that threshold finally kicked in, and I could tell that this monster, was looking at all of us as though we were nothing more than slabs of meat. The funny thing is, everyone always talks about the fight or flight response, but many people fail to realize that there's a third option that your brain can pick to override your thought process, and that's freeze. So when the monster, literally wearing human skin, turned to me and asked, "And what are you supposed to be?" I froze. After a few seconds, he grinned and answered for me. "I see we have a coward." At the time, my face burned in shame as the other kids in the room laughed at my new title, but that was the luckiest thing that could have ever happened to me. You see, over the years, I see fewer and fewer familiar faces coming out of the house when I show up for my run. In fact, I've only seen one other person I know in the last 5 years, but we'll get to him in a bit. Nowadays, when I show up, the ringleader checks me off his list and glowels when he says my title, the coward, and I can't help but grin smugly at him. It's probably not wise to revoke the house that way, but in all these years, the ringleader has been unable to win our life and death game. And it's all thanks to the title he gave me. Like many haunted places, this house has some rules. Thankfully, it's not a long and complicated list designed to trip you up through sheer complexity. There are only 3 simple things you need to know. The first rule is the Wolfman is in the basement. This is important because despite how innocuous he sounds, the Wolfman is quite possibly the most dangerous obstacle the house has. He's immortal, insanely fast, and impossibly strong. Once he gets your scent, you just have to hope you're close enough to the basement stairs to climb them before he catches you. And if you're not fast enough, you're food. Most of my closest calls came from encounters with the Wolfman. The second rule is to escape the house, you must find the heart of the house. The heart is in a different location every year, and no one will tell you where. You just have to find it, touch it, and get out. That is where being the coward comes in handy. My benefit is I get hunches. Those hunches might be about a new monster or a room you encounter. Best of all, they might tell me where the heart is located. The problem is, it's just a hunch, and it's far too easy to let my hopes or fears get in the way of a hunch. But over the years, I've learned to trust my gut. It's a lot smarter than I am. Oh, and the third rule? It's even more straightforward than the other two. If Mr. Hyde joins the hunt, everyone dies. That's it. You just have to hope and pray that Mr. Hyde decides to sit out another year. You can do a few things to mitigate that risk, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The rest of my first year was pretty forgetful, relatively speaking. There was some ghosts and zombies to run from, and the heart was in the kitchen. I don't even remember seeing any kids dying that time, but I do remember that while all the other kids were laughing and joking while running through the house, I noticed that the zombies looked just a little too real, and the blood and gore some of them had glistening on their lips looked like it might have belonged to those body bags out front. Maybe the house was taking pity on us because we were just kids. Or perhaps it wanted to let our fear simmer a little before it went all out. Over the following years, I saw some of those same kids again, but eventually, all their grins turned to grim, and their laughter disappeared. That's more or less what it was like for a few years. I ran through the house, got to the heart, and ran out. Once you reach the threshold and start leaving the yard, there's just one last obstacle. There, sitting on a bench you never see when you're approaching the house, is a being of pure malevolence. He looks like an oversized man, with arms that are far too long for his body, and always has a grin that would be goofy if it weren't so evil. This is Mr. Hyde. You must look at and acknowledge him, usually with a head tilt. Then look away and pray he decides your fear is enough that year. One time I stared just a little too long and he stood up and followed me to the yard's edge. The whole time I could feel his hot breath on the back of my neck, and I knew that so much as picking up the pace or turning around, I was dead. Another year I saw him sitting there with a corpse in his lap. He shoved his hand through the back of its skull and was using it like a puppet to make crude jokes and laughing at all the victims walking by. By then, I knew it wasn't just a prop, and I wondered what that poor soul had done to attract Mr. Hyde's attention. Maybe nothing. Perhaps it was just an unlucky day for the poor guy. I try not to think of Mr. Hyde too much. I get the feeling he knows when you're thinking about him, and I prefer not to attract too much of his attention. When I was 14, I made the biggest mistake of my life. My mom told me to take my little brother, not at the time, out trick-or-treating. No matter how much I protested or told her I had something important to do, she wouldn't relent, so eventually, I gave up and took him. Sure enough, the house showed up partway through our little venture. I remember looking my brother in the eye and telling him, "Stay out here. I have to take care of something, and you don't want any part of it, okay?" "Of course," he nodded. When I got inside, the ringleader started checking us off the guest list. After I introduced myself as the coward, I still hated the title at the time, I heard an all too familiar voice say, "I'm a wizard." Looking down in horror, I could see my kid brother standing there, grinning like the idiot he was. I tried protesting. No, he's not supposed to be here. Let him out right now." But the ringleader grinned and answered, "All are welcome in the haunted house, and the only way out is forward." He motioned us through. The first bit of our run was pretty standard. There were a few zombies that were easily dodged, and this time the heart was on the second floor. While climbing the stairs, giant spiders jumped down and grabbed people, then dragged them up into the rafters as they kicked and screamed. One came for my kid brother, but with a swift kick it fell to the floor below. As the nightmare on 8 legs started scuttling back up the stairs, we ran up and closed ourselves into the first room available. But of course, there's no such thing as a safe room in a haunted house like this, and sure enough, as we turned away from the door, we came face to midriff with a living shadow. It stood tall enough that it had to hunch over in a room more than big enough to house even the tallest NBA players comfortably. I call it a living shadow because its skin seems to absorb light, creating a void wherever it was. I remember it reaching out and grabbing me, and my skin burned from the extreme cold of its touch. But then my brother decided to take advantage of his gift, and I kid you not, he held out his hand like a finger gun and shouted, "Bang!" To this day, I have no idea how it worked or how he knew it would work, but the thing screamed and dropped me, clutching its arm like it had been shot. We kicked out the door, which thankfully slammed into the spider that had been chasing us, stunning it as we ran to the end of the hall, wherein lied the master bedroom and the heart of the house. The heart is a very literal heart, by the way, about the size of a large dog, usually visible through a crack in the wall. I've seen people stab it, shoot it, burn it, and do just about anything else you can think of. Yes, my brother had used his finger gun on it. And while the damage sometimes looks impressive, it always comes back the next year as if nothing happened. In this case, we merely tagged it and ran back into the hallway, vaulted the banister rather than trying the stairs again, and ran back out the entrance, home free. Of course, now my brother has to run the haunted house every year. We make it a point to go together, as between my coward hints and his magic finger guns, we seem to have a pretty strong advantage against whatever the house wants to throw at us. But that's not to say we don't have our close calls. 2 years ago, the heart was in the basement, and you remember what's in the basement, don't you? For most veterans, the basement is the last place you look, only after you clear the rest of the house. But when my gut says to go downstairs, that's where we go. It went pretty much like every trip downstairs goes. The place is filled with junk piled taller than me and smelled of cement, exposed carpentry, and mildew that many Midwest basements seem to have. The layout changes every year, so you're stuck kind of shuffling about, hoping you stumble into the right room without being caught, listening for screams and trying to go the other way. This time, we got to the heart without incident, which was good, but the wolfmen started chasing us on the way out. As I broke into a run, I could hear the wolfman right behind me, but I figured I had just enough time to reach the stairs. And then I tripped. Falling in the basement is about a surefire death sentence as you get in the house. But sure enough, in half a moment, the wolfman was on me. I still have the scars from where he cut my arm up as I protected my face and throat. My only consolation then was that at least my brother got away. However, not a moment later, the wolfman and I looked up in time to see my brother, with both hands making his classic finger guns, as he pointed it right at the wolfman's left eye and shouted, "Bang!" Let me tell you, seeing a full-grown man making finger guns and yelling "bang" with a straight face is quite the spectacle, but you gotta do whatever you can to survive that place. Now, the wolfman might be immortal, but that apparently doesn't mean he doesn't feel pain, because he sat down and screamed while holding his eye. I could see bits of his skull, white blood, and some substance leaking between his fingers. I didn't need an engraved invitation. I placed my foot square in the middle of his chest and kicked for everything I was worth. As the wolfman flew back, I rolled over and scrambled up the stairs on all fours like a kid who had just turned out the light. We both took a moment at the top of the basement stairs to laugh nervously before hearing an impossibly loud and enraged howl coming from the basement. We decided to not push our luck any longer and got the hell out of Dodge, winking at the ringleader and nodding more respectfully to Mr. Hyde as we passed. That brings us to last year, when at least one of the rules got broken for the first time. My brother and I met up as usual. I smirked at the ringleader as he scoffed at my title. We got past the starting zombies quick enough. Seriously, who dies to those things? But then I got the feeling the heart was out back in the garden. I was just relieved it wasn't the basement, as I didn't want to see the wolfman so soon after our last encounter. There was a glass passageway between the house and the garden, and this time it was filled with paper cranes floating gently on an unseen current of air, many of which seemed to have tiny rubies glistening on their wings. Of course, nothing in the house is ever innocent, and as we started walking carefully through the passage, the cranes began swooping, and every time they passed by, their wings glide across the skin, giving nasty paper cuts. That's when I noticed several bodies on the ground with pools of blood around them. Apparently, death by 1,000 cuts. Not having time to think, I raised my arms, covering my eyes and charging forward. By the time I reached the end, I probably had somewhere between 20 and 30 paper cuts, all of which stung worse than a bee sting. But remembering the bodies on the floor, it could have been much worse. What awaited us in the garden was a solitary figure. There, standing watch as if being plucked right out of an old Japanese movie, was an honest-to-God, heavily armored samurai. His face was obscured by his mask, but I'm reasonably sure that if I pulled down the mask, the armor would have been hollow. However, looking at the bodies besides the samurai that had obviously been cut in two, I decided not to indulge my curiosity. Judging by the placement of the bodies, some had tried to fight and others had tried to run. My brother got ready to fight, and immediately the warrior's hand flew to his sword, but I placed a hand on my brother's shoulder and pulled him back, stepping forward to face the samurai myself. As the samurai slowly drew his blade, rather than fight or flee, I got down on my knees and bowed, deciding to acknowledge that there was little else we could do. "O great warrior, we beseech you, be merciful and let us pass." Yeah, it was a little flowery, I admit, but hey, when asking a ghost samurai to spare your life, sometimes you have to go all out. When, after a moment, he didn't cut me down, which I'm at least 45% sure was due to my actions and words, I motioned for my brother to do the same. After a few moments, the samurai sheathed his sword and returned to his vigil, and we got off our knees and passed by, approaching the heart of the house. This time the heart was standing in a glass cylinder coming out of a rose bush. Carefully opening the cylinder, we touched the heart, which was warm and slimy as ever, before turning to leave. However, just as we did so, there, coming out of the glass passageway, came the one thing I least wanted to see at that moment. The Wolfman. He looked a little different than I remember. Half his face was rotted away, leaving his skull exposed. He had maggots wiggling and writhing in the empty socket that had once housed his eye. His teeth and claws were covered in blood of whoever had been unfortunate enough to get between him and his goal. And judging by the glare on his sole functioning eye, we were that goal. He stepped forward, crouching to begin his chase. Without the basement stairs nearby, I knew we didn't stand a chance to outrun him. Unsure what to do, I froze while my mind ran through what few options we had again and again. However, once again, my cowardice saved the day. As the Wolfman charged forward, he was intercepted by the samurai. The sideways slash should have cut him in half, but the Wolfman simply twisted and turned, bending his spine in a way that should have been impossible, before stopping to glare at his new obstacle. However, the samurai did not hesitate and stepped forward again, this time performing an upward slash even faster than his first strike. Realizing he wouldn't get past this annoyance without addressing it, the Wolfman launched himself forward, latching on to his opponent. The two fell and grappled in the dirt, and we took the opportunity to run past. When the Wolfman reached out to us, the samurai took his small blade and plunged it into the Wolfman's side. Their combat resumed. Running through the passageway, all the paper cranes were mangled and torn, laying on the ground, no longer a threat. Once inside, we could see the zombies in the house all torn to pieces. Running to the entranceway, the ringleader was just plain missing. Then we were outside and free. We took a moment to catch our breath, but when I looked up to acknowledge Mr. Hyde, I realized he was also missing from his usual seat. Some screams always echoed out of the house, but not like this. The screams were tortured and often inhuman. They were also interposed without bouts of manic laughter. Looking at each other, we both nodded and decided to run. We could wait a year to find out what was happening behind us. And that brings us to this year. I don't know what awaits me at the haunted house this time. Maybe it won't even show up. But somehow, I doubt I'll be that lucky. Procrastination has always been my biggest weakness when it comes to cleaning, buying fly traps, making to-do lists. It seems like everything. To be fair, I wouldn't have those problems if I didn't procrastinate disposing of his body. We encountered an eldritch god in the Mariana Trench by Deadbull4572. I never thought I'd be one to come face to face with an eldritch god, but there we were, deep in the Mariana Trench, on a routine mission to explore the depths of the ocean. It was part of a submarine crew, a group of highly trained individuals who were responsible for collecting data and samples to bring back to the surface. We had been exploring the trench for days, with nothing out of the ordinary happening. But on the fourth day, things started to get strange. We began to pick up strange readings on our instruments, one that we couldn't explain. At first, we thought it might be a malfunction with the equipment, but as we descended further into the trench, the readings only grew stronger. It was then that we saw it, a massive otherworldly entity that defied all description. Its body was made of twisting, withering tentacles that seemed to stretch on for miles. Its eyes were like black holes, sucking in all light and matter around them. and it emitted a sense of dread and terror that I couldn't quite comprehend. We were stunned, frozen in fear and awe. It was unlike anything we had ever seen before, and we didn't know how to react. But our training kicked in, and we quickly tried to gather as much data as we could about the creature. As we circled around it, taking readings and samples, we noticed something even more disturbing. The creature seemed to be aware of us, studying us with its unfathomable gaze. And then, with a sudden burst of movement, it lashed out with one of its tentacles, hitting our submarine and sending us reeling. The impact was so powerful that it knocked out our systems, leaving us stranded in the dark ocean. We were trapped, with no way out, and the creature continued to circle around us, almost as if taunting us. For hours we waited, hoping for a rescue team to arrive, but it became clear that we were on our own. Our supplies were running low, and the air was growing thin. But the worst part was the feeling of impending doom that hung over us. We knew that creature was still out there, waiting for us to make a move. We huddled together, trying to come up with a plan, but it was to no use. We were outmatched and outgunned, and there was no way we could take on a creature of that magnitude. And then it happened. The creature began to attack us again, this time with even more force. The submarine shook and groaned under the pressure, and I felt like we were going to be crushed to death. And then, just when I thought it was all over, the creature retreated. It disappeared back into the depths of the trench, leaving us alone and sighing in relief. We were silent for a moment, trying to process what just happened, and then, almost as if on cue, the emergency lights flickered on. We had power again, and with it, a small glimmer of hope. We quickly got to work trying to repair the damaged systems and come up with a plan to get out of there. It was a race against time, and we knew that creature could come back at any moment. We breathed a collective sigh of relief as we pulled to the surface, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for being given a second chance at life. Looking back on that experience, I still can't explain what we saw down there, but I know that it was something beyond our understanding, something that defied all logic and reason. And as we made our way back to the safety of land, I couldn't help but wonder what other unknown creatures and mysteries lay hidden in the depths of the ocean. I knew that we had just scratched the surface, and there were still many secrets waiting to be uncovered. Every time I tell someone about the abomination, it starts pursuing them instead of me. I'm sorry, but my survival is more important to me than a bunch of strangers on YouTube. Some of the children are not really children. By Flimsy Payment 9927. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me last Halloween. I've had a hard time coming to terms with what happened, and I've only been able to trust one other person with my story. He suggests that I tell it here. I brought this up with my psychiatrist several times, and she's written it off as stress-induced acute psychosis. Let me be clear. I have no history of mental illness, although I was struggling with some lingering grief at this time. I am certain that what I witnessed was not a result of this grief. Last year, I took my children trick-or-treating like I do every year on Halloween. Unfortunately, it fell on Monday, and I had to wait for the kids to get out of school before getting them ready. The days started off dreary, and the misty showers continued until late afternoon, which was absolutely ideal. When 3:30 came, the kids were excited to get their costumes on and head out. They looked adorable, and their joyous anticipation was contagious. I was absolutely reeling with vicarious excitement. Halloween was my favorite, and it was pure bliss to hang out with the kids on a spooky, drizzly night. The first 30 minutes or so went as expected. The kids darted from house to house, stopped to show me the variety of candy they had collected. It was good. It was normal. Eventually, we ended up at a small house about 2 blocks down from our own. I had seen this particular house many times during my walks, but nothing about it stood out to me. It was a plain, modest-looking yellow house with virtually no lawn decorations or vegetation, other than a small lawn and a single maple tree. There was no porch light, and there didn't seem to be any lights on the house, so I told the kids we should move on to the next in case the owners were away or didn't want to be bothered. But you know how kids are. It was Halloween, and they were wired for extortion. This house may have had candy, and there was an opportunity they couldn't pass. I figured it couldn't hurt, but something in my mind told me to walk up to the front door with them instead of hanging out back near the sidewalk. They knocked modestly on the door and waited a few moments. As the door creaked open, a small elderly woman peeked into the opening and gave a light, tired-looking smile. I half expected a terrifying, devious witch, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that she was quite normal. She was probably just not that into Halloween. She placed a couple of pieces of candy into the kids' bags and nodded in response to their thanks. I smiled politely and thanked her and turned to leave when she beckoned me with a curl of her fingers. "Yes, ma'am," I replied and leaned in to hear her. "You have beautiful children, and I know you celebrate an innocent fun." Oh God, she's going to tell me about the unholy pagan occult blasphemy that is Halloween, I thought. "Some of the children out tonight are not really children." I don't know how long I stood in this woman's doorway with what had to have been the most impolite look on my face. I started to ask her if she was referring to older teenagers because I had heard people complain about that before, and it agitated me a bit because I'd be collecting candy too if it was socially acceptable. "You'll be able to see it if you pay attention. Something will be off. The portions of the limbs, the sounds of the voice. Something of them aren't children." "Ma'am, I'm only telling you this because one of them is following you," she said, clearly trying to be delicate, but there was a haste in her voice. My heart sank. Sure, she was likely declining a bit cognitively, but her words shot through my veins and left behind an icy suspicion. I felt nauseous and had enough of the encounter, so I simply walked away. "She's fucking crazy," I muttered to myself. "Mommy, you shouldn't curse," my daughter sang, skipping towards the next house. I chose to shake off what the woman had said and continued enjoying the night with my kids. We continued this way, house to house, until I could tell their little feet had grown tired. They started dragging behind me a bit, and I decided to head back towards our house. It was a bit darker than when we started out, and the temperature dropped quite a bit. Now, we had just moved to this neighborhood about 6 months before, and I really prioritized the kids getting the opportunity to make friends. There was a few instances throughout the night that both of them saw other kids from their classes and said hello, or even walked with them for a few houses before going their separate ways. I made polite conversation with their parents and smiled and waved to the kids' friends, but I didn't explicitly remember any names or faces. So when a boy looked about my son's age called out to him from a couple houses down, I wasn't sure whether we had encountered the kid earlier in the night or not. "Aiden!" he waved excitedly to my son like second graders do. He looked quite a bit like my son, but lankier, with long, dark hair. My son waved back shyly, as he always does, and the boy came running awkwardly over to us. "Hey, Aiden, I like your Fortnite costume." Aiden looked uncomfortable, but he always kinda did when confronted with unexpected social situations. He thanked the kid and turned to walk in the direction of our house. "Are you in Aiden's class?" I asked, trying to sound polite even though I was dead tired. "Oh no, I see him at recess," he responded excitedly. In hindsight, his gleeful giggle was a little excessive. "Okay, well, we're heading home. Are your parents nearby?" I asked with general concern, since I didn't see any families around anymore. He started nervously. "I don't see my dad now, but he must be weighing down the block towards my house." He pointed in the direction we were going. "I'll walk with you until we get there," he declared instead of asking. So we continued walking, the kids chatting among themselves. Well, more so my daughter asking Aiden's recess friend a plethora of questions, and he answered with short answers and frequent giggles that began to sound more and more forced. Aiden looked as uncomfortable as ever, and I realized just how tired my feet were, just how dark it had gotten. The drizzle had stopped, but a mist lingered in the air, making the air heavy. "Mommy, what did the ladies say to you at the yellow house?" my daughter asked. "Nothing, baby. She was complaining about teenagers." "Mommy?" "Yes, baby." I was exhausted. My daughter lowered her voice to a whisper. "I've never seen him at recess. I don't think Aiden has either. He didn't even know the name of our school, and we've been walking for a very long time. When will we be home?" "Honey, I checked my phone. How was this the first time I checked my phone? 11:54. Fuck. What the fuck? "Mommy, I'm scared. I want to go home." My heart began to race, and my legs turned to jelly. "Guys, when did it get so late? I looked at the little boy standing in front of us, his face shifting continuously back and forth from the excited and nervous smile he had shown at first to a solemn and indifferent stare, then to a manic sneer of duperous delight. This experience kept looping from one to the next to the last, over and over. It felt overwhelmingly strenuous to look away, but the sound of fear in my children's voices was enough to sober me for longer stretches of time. I closed my eyes tight, gripping both of their arms tightly. "Aubrey, Mommy's confused. Tell me what's going on." "We kept trying to walk and you kept stopping and staring at him. We kept yelling for you to stop. Please, Mommy, I want to go home." With my eyes shut tight, my hands gripping their arms tightly, I shouted, "What the fuck are you? What do you want?" His voice was shrill and distorted. "Spare 5 minutes more. We're nearly there now. I've gotten to know you so deeply, Catherine." I could feel the vomit rising in my throat and my chest was on fire. I wasn't confident that my legs could carry me. "Guys, run home. Now, I'll follow." My brave and gallant babies obliged. "Don't leave this unfinished. You'll force me to show up again." I ran as fast as I ever had to catch up to the kids and pull them inside our home. I said this at the beginning, and I'll say it again. Almost nobody believes me about this. My kids knew something was wrong with Mommy, and something was off about the boy, but they aren't able to quite put it together, and honestly, neither am I. I'm sharing this because I may save someone's life. I don't know what this entity is, but it looks very much like a child, and it completely removes you from reality. If you encounter a child you don't know on Halloween this year, look for signs that something's off. The limbs, the voice, the demeanor. If anything feels wrong, do not engage. Something was left unfinished that night, and I believe it's coming back for me. I thought I would have the usual mild annoyance that comes with looking for something in IKEA. And with not finding the entrance and exit as normal, it seems like I'm walking through the same place over and over. But there really aren't any walls, and the staff are creeping me out. Never buy a Halloween mask from a yard sale. You could be getting more than you bargained for. By Horror Writer 1717, aka Michael Kelso. I always loved taking my little 8-year-old daughter Chrissy trick-or-treating ever since she was old enough to walk. I dressed her up like a ballerina or a princess or whatever cute character would draw the most smiles and, "Oh, aren't you adorable," comments. If I had known how things were going to end, I never would have taken her trick-or-treating in her entire life. It had started in late September when I hadn't picked out an outfit for Chrissy yet. We were hitting the end of the season's yard sales, and the neighbor had told me that one we were going to had lots of Halloween costumes. When we got there, I discovered she wasn't kidding. The one side of her garage was nothing but costumes hanging on racks. I wondered why there were so many when I checked out the prices. Mystery solved. Her prices were only a few dollars less than the department store. Why do people do that, assuming that their stuff that's been sitting around in their attic or garage is worth so much? I made a polite show of looking through the outfits in hopes that I would stumble across something cute and cheap. Although, with the rest of the prices being so high, anything cheap would be immediately suspect. As I was searching in vain, Chrissy came to me holding a mask. "Look, Mommy," she said. "I can go as a witch this year." I looked at the mask of an old woman's grotesque face. "Is that really what you want to go as?" I said. "Why not a princess?" "Oh, Mom, I go as a princess every year." "How about a unicorn?" "I just really want to go as a witch this year." I sighed, holding the unicorn outfit in my hand and looking into her pleading eyes. "Please." "All right," I said, putting the unicorn back and digging out the rest of the witch outfit. In the end, it saved me $10. I guess the witch wasn't selling well. I wish with everything in me that I could return that $10 and do everything that happened. We walked up to the old woman, Miss Henderson, who was selling the clothes and paid for the outfit. It struck me as we walked out how much her face reminded me of the mask. We were barely in the door at home until Chrissy ran off with the outfit to try it on. I carried in the rest of my yard sale finds and set them down to find places for them later. I turned around and my heart skipped a beat as a tiny witch stood staring at me. "Oh, Chrissy," I said, "you nearly scared the life out of me." "I'm sorry, Mommy," she said, but it wasn't Chrissy's voice that came out. It sounded higher-pitched and garbled. "I see the mask has a little bonus to it," I said. "That's not all," she said in her modified high-pitched garble. "Looking through it's really cool, too." It was a little disturbing hearing the voice, but knowing it was my daughter saying the words. If she were older, I'm sure she would use this to scare me several times before Halloween came around. "Let me see," I said. She had a little difficulty taking the mask off, but when she did, I put it on and looked through the red lens that were sewn in. It made the world look a lot different. Not just the color, but there seemed to be an aura around objects. I shrugged it off and lunged at Chrissy, saying, "Boo!" She jumped and squealed as I chased her around the table.
"I'll get you, my pretty,"
I said as I chased her into the living room. She dove onto the couch and tried to hide behind some pillows. I slowly circled the couch, closing in for the kill, when I saw something dart away out of the corner of my eye. I didn't think she could move that fast, but I pursued the new target down the hallway towards the bedrooms. "Mommy, where are you going?" I heard Chrissy say behind me. I pulled off the mask and she was standing in the living room by the couch watching me. I glanced back at the hallway and shrugged it off. It must have been my imagination. I went back into the living room and gave her the mask. "Are you sure you'll be able to see in that thing on a dark Halloween night?" I said. "It's okay, Mommy," she said. "There's plenty of streetlights, and besides, you'll be there with me." "Oh, yes," I said. "I almost forgot." She smiled and hugged me, then grabbed the mask and skipped away happily. Over the next week, she took the time to scare me with it on a daily basis. It got to the point where I had to threaten to take it away from her. I still caught her wearing it quite often. With Halloween quickly approaching, I could barely keep the thing off her head. Finally, the big night came. Chrissy was bouncing off the wall with excitement. She was dressed in her costume and ready to go an hour before trick-or-treat even started. All through the day, I'd been keeping an eye on the storm clouds that were brewing, threatening to put a damper on our fun. But until evening rolled around, they had blown off and left a nice evening that wasn't too warm or too cool. We left the house, making sure to leave our porch light off so not to tease any trick-or-treaters with a false pretense of candy at our house. We started down the dark street lit by the occasional street light. At first, Chrissy is pulling on me like a dog straining against a leash to get to the first house. But as we walked, she drew closer to me. The first house was everything you expected. The nice woman who answered the door asked, "And what are you supposed to be?"
"I'm a witch,"
was Chrissy's enthusiastic response. But being said through whatever filter was in that mask made the woman jump. "Oh my," she said. "That's quite a costume." She politely held up the bowl for Chrissy to choose 2 candies from, then disappeared back into her house. We hadn't seen but a few other trick-or-treaters until we turned onto the main street, and they seemed to be everywhere, dodging back and forth across the street. They wore every kind of costume you could think of, from the classic ghosts to cartoon characters to zombies to princesses. I looked wistfully at the princess when the little witch holding my hand suddenly pulled against me. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I said as she huddled close to me.
"I'm scared, Mommy,"
she said in that high-pitched screeching voice the mask somehow produced. "Of what, baby?"
"The monsters."
I looked and there was a zombie, Frankenstein, and a werewolf walking together towards us up the street. "Baby, they're just costumes," I said. "Just like every other year."
"Are you sure?"
she said, her death grip on my hand loosening just a bit. "Of course, honey," I said. "Everyone's just dressed up to have fun, just like you. Don't you think some other little girls will look at you and be scared of the witch?" The grip loosened to normal.
"I guess so."
We started down the street, following along with a crowd of superheroes and other colorful characters. The more houses we went to, the more she seemed to relax and enjoy herself. There were still a few times when she'd walk so close to me that she almost tripped me. mostly when there were large groups coming towards us. Frankly, I was surprised she could see much of anything out of that mask. There were a few spots where the streetlights were further apart, and I struggled to see the sidewalk. On the whole, though, the evening had been going well. Her bag was filling with candy, and everyone seemed to like her outfit. We even came to Miss Henderson's house, the woman who had sold it to us. When we stood at the end of her walkway, Chrissy hesitated.
Are you sure the monsters are pretend?
She said, looking up at me with that disturbing mask. Of course, sweetie. Go on up to the door. A group was just leaving as Chrissy walked up.
Ah, I see my costume has come home,
Miss Henderson said, dressed as a witch herself and sounding much like the voice the mask made.
Trick or treat,
Chrissy said. She stared at her for a moment as Chrissy seemed to stare at nothing on the porch beside the woman. She glanced over at the empty porch and leaned down to whisper something to Chrissy's ear while she held out the candy bowl. Chrissy nodded her head as she grabbed 2 pieces of candy and darted away from the woman. I smiled and we walked towards the next house. As soon as we were out of sight, I pulled her aside. What did that woman say to you, Chrissy? I said. For a long moment, the tiny witch eyes stared at me silently.
She asked me if I liked the mask,
she said. I looked into those red plastic lenses, completely unable to tell if what she said was the truth. I paused and took a deep breath. I think maybe we've had enough trick-or-treating for the night, I said.
I think so too,
she said, much to my surprise.
Can we go home now?
I looked at her half-full bag of candy that didn't have nearly as much in it as the other Halloweens, but she'd been acting odd the whole time. Sure, sweetie, I said, smiling. Let's head home. We crossed to the other side of the street at Chrissy's urging, so we wouldn't have to go near the woman's house again. Either it was my imagination or we made it home more quickly than I expected. I was nearly out of breath when we opened the door and Chrissy dove inside, ripping off the mask and costume. She ran to her room and changed into her pajamas, then came back out and gave the costume and mask a wide berth as she went to the couch. It's not quite bedtime yet. Do you want to watch something on TV? I said.
No, I'm pretty tired, she said. I think I'll go to bed. Good night, Mommy.
She started towards her bedroom. Don't you want any of your candy? She looked from me to the bag of candy sitting on the end of the table.
I'll have some tomorrow,
she said. What about your costume? She stared at it lying on the floor.
I don't want it anymore,
she said, and then went to her room and shut the door. I stared at her as she went. I couldn't imagine when she wouldn't dive into her candy. Usually I had to limit her so she wouldn't go to bed with a sugar high. I stepped over and picked up the costume, sighing at the wasted money, but happy she enjoyed it, if only for a little while. I walked over to the trash can and threw the costume in. As I held the mask, I felt like I had to look through it one more time. I put it over my head and the world was instantly bathed in red. I looked around and for whatever reason the auras surrounding objects seemed brighter. I was about to take it off when I saw something dart off to the side. I ripped the mask off and looked where I had seen the movement, but nothing was there. I tossed the mask into the garbage and did a slow lap around the room, searching for anyone who may have been trying to play a prank on me like a certain little former witch. I smiled as I looked from hiding place to hiding place, knowing she was trying to sneak up on me and scare me. It was the only thing that made sense. She had passed up on the candy and her precious costume to throw me off guard so she could sneak up on me and give me a Halloween scare. I finished my circle through the room without finding her, then ended up by the locked front door. I made my way back to the hall, expecting to be surprised at any moment. My biggest surprise was that it never came. I stood in front of Chrissy's door and slowly opened it, peeking inside. I saw her fast asleep, or doing an excellent job of faking being asleep. I shrugged it off and went to my bedroom. My head hit the pillow, and I was soon fast asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, knowing something was wrong. I sat bolt upright and scanned the room. Beside my bed stood a shadowy figure. My heart froze as I went into full panic mode. Someone was in the house, and they were standing beside my bed. I threw myself to the other side of the bed and fumbled for the light. When I turned it on, I saw Chrissy standing there wearing the witch mask. It took a minute to let my heart return to normal before I said, "Chrissy, honey, you scared me," I said. She didn't reply. She just stood there still as a statue. I had to watch her chest rise and fall just to be sure she was still breathing. "Chrissy, why did you get the mask out of the garbage?" She didn't move. "Chrissy, honey, why don't you take off that mask and go back to bed?" She remained still. I slowly crawled across the bed and stood beside her. My hand hesitantly reached towards her and pulled off the mask. To my surprise, her eyes were closed. It was as if she was still asleep. "Chrissy?" I said gently, rubbing her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked at me. "Why did you wake me up, Mommy?" she said. "You were sleepwalking, baby." "I was?" "You took the mask out of the garbage and put it on, then walked to my room." "I don't remember that." "That's how sleepwalking works, baby. Usually don't remember." "I'm tired and I'm going back to bed now." I kissed her forehead. "You sleep good now," I said. She walked out of my room, leaving me holding the mask. It stared at me with its empty red eyes, making me feel more than a little uncomfortable. I leaned down and put it in my bottom nightstand drawer, then turned off the light and tried to go back to sleep. But sleep did not come easily. I tossed and turned for hours. Every time I would drift off, a vision of the mask would invade my dreams, and I would be startled awake, absolutely certain that someone had just been in my room. But each time the room was empty. No sleepwalking Chrissy, no villainous stranger hovering over me. When morning came around, I stumbled for the coffee maker to try to get myself moving. "Morning, Mommy," Chrissy said cheerfully, sitting on the kitchen table watching TV while eating a bowl of cereal. I mumbled something like morning as I stumbled through making a fresh pot of coffee, mixing it extra strong. "Didn't you sleep good, Mommy?" she said in her cheerful little voice. "No, I didn't, thanks to a certain little visitor in the middle of the night," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Who?" "You," I said. "You came into my room in the middle of the night, wearing and scaring me nearly half to death." Her little brow furrowed. "I didn't get out of bed at all last night, Mommy." "Yes, you did, Chrissy," I said. "You dug that witch mask out of the garbage and wore it into my room." "You threw my mask in the garbage?" "Yes, I did," I said slowly. "I thought it scared you so bad you didn't want it anymore." Her eyes became unfocused as she seemed deep in thought. "Maybe I just was tired last night. I didn't want you to get rid of my mask." "Then how did you?" I said as a news flash came over the TV. In local news, a 63-year-old Martha Henderson was found dead this morning. Police are investigating, but it appears someone broke into the woman's house late last night and assaulted her. She was pronounced dead this morning by the coroner. The cause of death? Multiple stab wounds. A picture of the woman flashed up on the screen. "Look, Mommy,"
The lady we bought the mask from,
Chrissy said. It hadn't dawned on me until she pointed out, but she was right. The lady from the yard sale, who lived only a short walk away, was brutally stabbed to death last night. I thought back to Chrissy standing in my bedroom and shuddered at the fact that some crazy killer could have been hovering over me, or even worse, hovering over Chrissy last night. I shook the thoughts away as I glanced at the clock.
Hurry, honey, I said. You'll be late for the bus.
I went to the door as she gathered her book bag. When I got there, a shock awaited me.
Chrissy, did you unlock the door this morning?
I said.
No, Mommy. Why?
No reason, I said, smiling as I pushed open the door that had not only been unlocked, but slightly ajar. We stepped out into the cool November morning air, streetlights still glowing as the sun fought to rise over the horizon. I pulled her jacket tight around her and zipped it up.
You have a great day at school,
I said as the bus pulled up.
I will, Mommy,
she said with that infectious smile. The bus slowed to a stop and Chrissy waited in line with the other kids to get on and be carried away to school. I waved as it drove away, glancing at the other mothers. Usually there would be some idle chit-chat between some, but today everyone quickly dispersed back to their houses. I told myself it was because of the cold, but I knew they were all thinking the same thing as me. There's a murderer running loose around our neighborhood. Everyone was getting back inside their house as quickly as possible and double locking their doors. I stepped through my own door and examined the lock as if it had somehow betrayed us. I locked and unlocked it several times to make sure it worked, and then, once I was satisfied, I closed it and locked it. I changed my work clothes of a dress shirt and jogging pants, then sat down at my laptop. Telecommunications had been both a blessing and a curse. Staying home was great for a while, but soon I began craving actual face-to-face social interaction. Video meetings on the computer just weren't the same, and after the shocking news this morning, I wasn't feeling very secure at home. I would have felt better around other people. The day seemed to drag on as I found myself often distracted by shooting furtive looks towards the window as I expected someone to crash through one and murder me at any moment. I found myself coasting through the day, fighting to keep my focus on my job. When the knock came at the door, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I approached it slowly as if I was about to be attacked. When I looked out the peephole, there was no one there. A chill ran down my spine when there was another knock just as I turned away. I stared at the door knowing no one was on the other side and wondering what kind of supernatural dream state I had fallen into. Was I asleep at my keyboard and having a nightmare? The knock sounded again, but this time there came a voice with it.
Mommy, why is the door locked?
Chrissy said. I stepped back to the peephole and looked out. There stood Chrissy. I unlocked and ripped the door open so fast she jumped back.
Why weren't you outside waiting for me?
She said with betrayal reflecting in her eyes. I glanced over at the wall clock and sure enough, it was time for her to be home.
I'm so sorry, sweetie, I said. Mommy must have gotten busy and time got away. Why did you lock the door?
I felt like locking it. She looked at me with this odd, knowing look.
Was it about the lady who got killed?
Maybe, I said, trying to be non-committal.
Do you think whoever did it is still around?
She said as if she was just asking if it was going to rain tomorrow.
Are you hungry? I said. Let's get a snack.
I spent the rest of the evening helping with her spelling words and playing games. It was a wonderful time. After supper, we watched her favorite show and then went to bed.
Good night, Mommy,
she said as I tucked her in.
Don't be afraid. Everything will be all right.
I considered asking what she meant, but in the end, all I did was smile and say, I know, while I stroked her hair. If only I'd known. I woke up in the middle of the night, startled again by Chrissy standing at my bedside.
"Oh, Chrissy, you need to stop scaring Mommy like that,"
I said, looking into the eyes of the mask she was wearing. Wait a minute.
"Chrissy,"
I said slowly.
"how did you get that mask back?"
She didn't answer me for a long moment.
"My friends gave it to me."
"What friends, honey?"
"The same ones I saw on the street on Halloween,"
she said.
"The ones you said were just pretending to be monsters."
A chill ran down my spine.
"When did you talk to these friends last?"
"Tonight, when they gave me the mask back,"
she said.
"They're not happy that you keep throwing it away."
I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm.
"I threw it away because Halloween is over."
"Not for them,"
she said.
"They dress in their costumes all the time."
"The monster costumes?"
She nodded.
"And you can see them in their monster costumes?"
I said slowly.
"Only when I wear the mask."
My hand darted out and tried to grab the mask and take it off her, but she dodged and backed away. I heard a high-pitched cackle come from the mask, remembering how it changed her voice.
"They said you might try that,"
she said.
"They told me about a fun game we can play."
She skipped away as I jumped out of my bed and followed her. She ran down the hall to her room and darted inside. I peeked around the corner, not sure what I would find. Chrissy was standing on the other side of her bed, looking at me through that horrid mask.
"They gave me some fun new toys to play this game with,"
she said, reaching under her pillow and pulled out 2 butcher knives that looked like mini swords in her little hands that barely wrapped around the handles. My eyes grew wide.
"What if I don't want to play this game?"
I said. She looked off to the side as if seeing something I couldn't.
"They said they wouldn't like that at all,"
she said, lowering her voice.
"It would make them angry."
I glanced in the direction she was looking, but didn't see anything. Just then, Chrissy jumped up on her bed and dove at me, swinging the knives. I was caught completely off guard. One of the knives caught my forearm and slashed a long gash in it.
"Chrissy!"
I yelled, but she was still coming at me, swinging the knives.
"Come on, Mommy, play!"
she said in a maniacally high-pitched, masked voice. I dove to the side, feeling the knives slice my forehead, then ran out of her room into the kitchen.
"You hurt Mommy,"
I said as I ran.
"Don't worry, Mommy,"
she said.
"It's just like a video game. After you die, you respawn."
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was something that mask was doing to her. I had to get it off her any way I could. Once in the kitchen, I glanced around for anything I could use. My eyes fell briefly on the knife block that still held several steak knives. The thought was fleeting, and I quickly dismissed it. I was fighting the mask, not my daughter. I had to make sure I didn't hurt her. Quickly searching, I found a dish towel and grabbed it just in the nick of time as Chrissy came charging into the kitchen. She swung at me with one of the knives, and I was able to block it with the towel, but it had cut partway through. I quickly wrapped the remaining towel around the knife and pulled it out of her grip. She stumbled and fell to the floor. I was on top of her in an instant. She kicked and flailed, swinging the remaining knife at me, just missing my face by inches. I blocked the knife with my already bleeding arm and used the other arm to rip it out of her grip. It wasn't easy as it should have been. She had some supernatural strength. Eventually, I was able to pull it free. I reached for the mask, but suddenly something grabbed my hair and yanked me backwards. I rolled over and got up, but nothing was there. At least, nothing I could see. Chrissy jumped up and grabbed 2 of the steak knives from the block and started chasing around the kitchen table. It would have been comical just like we had done many other times, chasing each other and laughing. But no one was laughing now, and my life was on the line. A kitchen chair moved itself in my way, making me trip and fall. I jumped back up before she got to me, but I felt something brush against the back of my leg. I glanced back, and she had sliced a gash in my leg. We continued around the table, but I knew I had to go somewhere I could use open space to run away and get some distance between us.
"You're not as fun as Miss Henderson was,"
I heard the mask say.
"She screamed and begged like a good little girl. She didn't run like you."
The shock hit me like a sledgehammer. The mask had used my daughter to kill the neighbor. I knew now more than ever I had to get this thing off her and destroy it. I ran out the front door, not even thinking that I was only wearing a nightshirt and underwear. I knew I needed help. I ran to the next door neighbor's house and beat on the door, yelling for help. Chrissy burst out of our house and saw me, then ran after me. I went to the next neighbor and beat on their door, then the next, all the while a little girl wearing a homicidal mask chasing me. After 3 houses, people started to come out to see what was going on. I doubled back to where a few of my neighbors had gathered.
"Help me," I said. "I need to get that mask off her."
They looked from me to a charging Chrissy, holding 2 knives. I ran away and the neighbors parted like the Red Sea. There was a tree in our yard that had branches low enough to climb, but Chrissy hadn't been able to reach them yet. I climbed up, my bare feet slipping on the bark as I tried to make it out of reach. She came at me so fast I knew I wouldn't make it, and I'd be a sitting duck for her to slice and dice. At the last moment, my feet gained enough traction to get up to the first branch. She jumped and slashed at me, but all the blades cut was thin air. She stood under the branches, jumping and slashing at me in vain. She was still doing it when the police arrived and took her away. I jumped down, nearly tangling myself in the branch, and ran after the police.
"Wait, please, that's my daughter," I said.
They had restrained and disarmed her, but not taken off the mask. I pulled it off with much more effort than it should have taken and thrown it as far away from her as I could. When it was finally off, Chrissy's eyes searched around as if waking from a dream. Her eyes landed on me.
"Mommy?"
she said.
"Yes, sweetie,"
I said, wrapping her in a big hug.
Ma'am,"
one of the officers said.
"Are you sure that's wise? This girl was trying to kill you."
"It wasn't her, it was that thing," I said, pointing at the mask, but it was gone. I visit her every day in the mental hospital. The staff there are quite fond of her and say she's the most delightful patient they ever had. None of them believe why she's there. They all say it must be some mistake. I know it was too. It was a mistake to ever buy that mask.
"The police are finally here,"
I said, rushing to unlock this safe room's door. Through the phone, I heard the dispatcher say,
"Ma'am, the police are still 5 minutes out."
just as the door began to creak open. The Forgotten Room by Verrgasm. My father once told me, in one of our rare familiar moments of sincerity, that the men he sentenced to die were lower than even the filthiest disease-ridden vermin, that by punishing them so severely, he was in fact performing a divine service. A service not simply in honor of the crown, but unto God himself. Ours was claimed to be a domain which belonged to the Lord, and therefore to the English Empire. It is in my opinion that he did generally believe in such rhetoric with all of his heart, which surely is a testament to how he was able to find restful slumber in the night, year after year, as the wails of the damned permeated the castle walls. All the while, beyond the confines of our home, hundreds more were slain by the day under similar such orders. It is with this testimony which I give according to nothing more than my own free will and insurmountable and eternal guilt that I hope to dispose my father's sterling reputation among the populace, that I may bring forth into light and make known the horrendous truth of his deeds to the fullest possible extent, so that people will know that they do not revere a stellar hero of war and battle, but instead a calculous monster most vile and wicked. My sworn mission throughout the remainder of my life shall be to purge the contrived collective memory which has been erroneously constructed around my father, following his death some 6 years ago to this day upon writing. This is my confession, as both a still patriotic subject of the crown, and as a remorseful human being under God's watchful sight. My soul cannot find respite beneath the weight of what I have seen. The burden is simply too great. Throughout my childhood years spent sequestered within the castle, living by my father's outsourced care, I recall that a tremendous effort was made to keep me firmly away from the carnage of the orders handed out during those dark times. Whether this was done out of some obscure parental love which I never truly saw, or it was simply to assuage the doubt possibly simmering in the background of his own fanaticism, I shall never know. But I was consistently and relentlessly refused from venturing too far into certain areas of the property. In fact, the very presence of the dungeon complex itself escaped my naive perception until I was already a man of 15 years. At which point, owing to a tempestuous resolve of young rebellion, I found myself sneaking beyond my father's ever-present grasp as night fell and the guards became less vigilant. The excursions were only slight at first. I would make trips to the pantry where I would prepare my own food, a joy which I maintain to this day. Or I would venture into the courtyard to gaze at the stars above and marvel at the complexity of the infinite. It was there, looking upwards into the twinkling perpetual beauty, that I first began to unravel the frightful revelation which would kill that sense of wonder within me forevermore. I would hear the muffled groans, the wailing, the screams. They were somewhat sporadic, but ultimately undeniable, and so wildly apparent in their abject suffering. So I stopped making trips to the courtyard entirely, unable to stomach the frightening calls for mercy from which I knew not where they came. At first, and it does embarrass me so to make my naivety known in such a public way as this, but I thought perhaps the castle may be inhabited by a number of restless spirits. I shall never forget my father's response when I brought those concerns to him in child earnestness. He bellowed, laughing and without the slightest remorse, that those old ghosts were no longer in a position to harm any decent folk in any way anymore. They are to be forgotten, like any other such refuse. It became clear that the answers I was in search of would not come from the mouths of my father nor his sympathetic entourage, and so I foolishly set out to uncover the source of those distressing sounds of my own, an endeavor of which, shameful I might add, I often find myself regretful of as I lay awake at night. Had I never seen such atrocities being carried out firsthand, had I even been simply informed of them as my father was, without the sight of the truly unignorable brutality laid bare, perhaps I might even be in my father's place today, lecturing in the flimsy justified carnage being wrought on our northern neighbors still, just as he was for all those terrible years. Ignorance, I have learned, can be and often is a blissful experience, especially for one in a position of an unyielding, supposedly God-given authority. In the glow of an imposing full moon, I began my descent into the bowels of hell, constructed of grimy stone and iron bars, and with each step, the cries became all the more real. At the bottom of the stairs, a long corridor met my shuddering acquaintance, one with doorways of splintering wood on both sides, accumulating in a single darkened chamber at the end which laid open. My footsteps seemed to carry into forever, echoing over the sobs of the broken on either side as I struggled with my nerves after reaching each closed doorway. In my fright, the will to face what lay on the other side of them became even weaker, until I had found myself at the very end, peering through the darkness of the only chamber door left open. Silence seemed to inhabit its small space, quite unlike all the others, which so clearly homed to grunted and groaned suffering, muffled beneath indifferent wood and stone and steel. With a shaking hand, I pulled a still glowing lantern from its rusty hook and paced ever so carefully inside, where I was met by a wooden hatch placed upon the center of the floor. A whimper escaped my lips as I gripped the heavy handle with my free hand and slowly pulled upwards until what lay beneath became undeniable. A mass of pale, lacerated, bruised flesh laid square off beneath me, trapped firmly within the cramped shaft-like space. Arms withered languidly. A balding, scraggly-haired head protruded from the very center. Even a foot poked up above the rest, crammed inside the cramped passage leading straight down into God only knows where. The toes on the foot curled, the sight of what filled me with such unimaginable horror that I was unable to maintain what little composure remained within me. My startled yells provoked those jammed inside, rousing them into fits of wails which became various pleas for immediate death. The man whose head was at the surface craned his neck to face me, before recoiling from the brightness of the lantern clutched ever tightly to my chest. Finally, after what seemed like a millennia of terror, I fled like a coward back to the safety of my bedchamber, where I found not rest, but near madness. The following morning, as the sun began to rise, I raided the pantry for some meager supplies and appropriated a horse from the stables. Then, I abandoned my duties and began my journey to the shores of France, where I still reside to this day. I shall never forget the look on the face of the man trapped in that hellish abyss. His glassy white eyes haunt me, now and forever. They were the eyes of the damned, forgotten and cursed beyond any punishment that could ever be deemed appropriate by a society still governed by something resembling humanity. When I think back to those innocent years, before the hidden barbarity of my family and countrymen became so painfully apparent to me, I can still find no pleasure even in those happiest of memories. They are soiled, indeemably drenched in blood. While I ate plentiful and slept soundly and learned from my mentors with such youthful enthusiasm, beneath my very feet at any given time, scores of men and women alike were being subjected to torture, not even befitting any possible conception of the underworld. It is in this that I know that when death comes for me, as it did my father, there is only one place fit for a complicit coward, such as myself. The place is below, deep below, where the sun does not even shine, and the air is fetid and damp and filled with anguish. Although I pray night and day for forgiveness, I accept none. I accept my inevitable damnation. So should any other who knows anything of what has been described here and did nothing as I did. Our fates are already sealed in eternity. I waved at the cruise ship as it carried my parents away, holding back the tears as I did so. It was dark, though, so nobody saw me, and soon I was alone in the seemingly depthless dark ocean. The real reason I don't look at my reflection in the mirrors in the dark anymore. By Andy A. Adams. I think we all know the legend of Bloody Mary, a beautiful yet vain and self-obsessed girl who lived in a small village. But in case you don't, it is said that she would spend hours upon hours just admiring herself in the mirror each day, until one day, when a tragic accident happened that left Mary disfigured beyond recognition. Unable to bear the sight of her own reflection anymore, and consumed with grief and self-hatred, Mary was but a former shell of herself. Years went by, and Mary became consumed by her new obsession, revenge against the mirror that once held her beauty. So one night, she lit a candle and stood in front of the mirror, chanting, "Bloody Mary," she said, referring to herself and looking at that hideous girl who was looking back. "Bloody Mary," she chanted again, this time angrier, more desperate. "Bloody Mary." But at the third chant parted her lips. Instead of the brutally scarred woman, what was looking back at her was a twisted, grotesque, vengeful creature. And now, legends go that if you stand in the mirror, in the dark, holding a candle, you'll see Mary, and she will seek to extract her revenge on you. Now, I'm not superstitious, but I don't go looking for trouble either. So I never really chanted Bloody Mary in the mirror holding a candle. But what I have done before, and solemnly thought twice about, was walk around the house in the dark holding a candle. You know, power goes out, you light a candle. Romantic setting, light a candle. Ominous, eerie Halloween party, light a candle. That sort of thing. In my walking around the house shenanigans, it happened, maybe once or twice, that I'd pass a mirror. Never paid much attention to it, although, looking back, I can't remember if I've ever checked my reflection before or not. Except, one time, I definitely did. We had just moved into a new home a few days back. My husband had to go out of town, so it was just me and the dog. I was upstairs unpacking boxes, sorting things. You know how it goes when you just move into a new place. The work never ends. As I was going from room to room, from upstairs to downstairs and back, constantly moving heavy stuff from one place to another, I left plenty of lights on around the house to facilitate my toings and froings. I guess that's what must have triggered it, because at some point, when I plugged my phone in to charge it, the power switch went off. "Damn it," I said, knowing the switch was all the way in the basement and my phone was at 2%. Luckily, I had some candles laying around in one of the boxes, and just enough juice in my phone to find them. Also, luckily, I had packed the lighters with the candles. Yay for organizational skills. I lit one of those long, thick IKEA candles. I remember it even now. It was red, burgundy red, like blood, and went down the stairs. The house had a huge mirror just at the entrance, on the left, covering the whole wall. This mirror would also greet you as you came down the stairs, as the staircase was also positioned at the entrance, but on the right-hand side. So, as I descended with my lit bloody red candle, I came face to face with the wall-sized mirror. There was no way to not look at my reflection, save for closing my eyes. Not that it was a concern at the time. As I was coming down the stairs, I noticed something off on my neck, so I stepped up to the mirror for a closer look. Initially, I couldn't spot anything, but as seconds went by, I felt like my reflection was distorting. I moved about, and sure enough, the reflection did too, but it was grinning in a way that I felt my face wasn't grinning in reality. I puckered my lips, and the reflection puckered its lips also, but the grin somehow remained. I realized the weird grin wasn't coming from my lips, but rather it was imprinted in the reflection's eyes. I tried looking away, but I struggled to find the willpower. All my brain wanted to do was stare at my reflection, and the more I did, the more distorted it was becoming. The eyes, they were becoming larger, and the mouth was now contorted in a way that mine was certainly not. And it was moving closer, even though I was definitely frozen in place. It wasn't walking as much as it was zooming in with crazy eyes and grinning, and even though its lips weren't moving, it was laughing, at least in my head. In that moment, I felt like I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but fully awake and vertical. The more I looked, the more I did not recognize myself anymore. The person, or rather, the thing staring back at me, was disfigured beyond recognition. Was it Mary, I wondered? Its eyes were bulging out, mouth open and sucked in. It lifted a hand. It did a come hither motion with the index finger. I felt compelled to step closer. Die, it said, making my heart pump out of my chest. Die, die, die. My heart felt like it was going to explode. That's when my dog came running and barking from upstairs, startling me and releasing me from the grip the mirror had previously held on me. The reflection was now my own again. For the brief second I looked. I didn't dare look for longer. I shut my eyes as I ran towards the basement door. I flipped the switch and covered the mirror that very night. The next day, when my husband returned, I asked him to remove it, so he placed it in the attic. I never told him why, just said I didn't like how it looks. I never figured out if it was that particular mirror, or if this happens when you hold a candle in a mirror, if that was Mary, if I was cursed, if the candle needs to be read. I have so many questions that I never intend to find out the answers to. What I know is that I no longer look at a reflection in the dark. Not in a mirror, nor in a glass door, not even without a candle. The note read, "Please make sure the cats are fed, their water is changed often, and they get plenty of love." "A bit too late for that," I whispered as the paramedics lowered the body of my brother down from the ceiling fan, his feet having been chewed down to mangled stumps. Black Water by Darkheroxx. As I walked through the old apartment building, I let out a frustrated sigh. My brother-in-law owns this place, and he's proud to brag about how much money he's made since raising the rent here. The guy is a jerk, and yet I'm working maintenance for him. I'm not even a maintenance man. I just look up how to fix things on YouTube. He pays me well enough for me to be content, and I'm cheap enough for him to save some money. Today's job seems plenty easy enough. A little old lady at 3B needs her bathtub fixed. In my mind, it sounds just like a clog or something. But she complained to my brother-in-law that it was something much worse. He threw a tantrum about it. But if it's just a clog, fine, easy cash for me. I got to 3B and knocked on the door. After a minute or so, the door creaked open, and in front of me was an older woman. She was hunched over with long white hair and wearing a dark purple dress. Her nose was long and hooked at the tip, and she gave me a smile with a few missing teeth. I held back laughter as I imagined her flying around on a broomstick. I straightened up and introduced myself, to which she grabbed my hand to greet me. Her hands were soft and warm. For a second, I remember my grandmother. She pulled me inside of her home and led me to the bathroom. I took quick glances around the place as I followed her. The place was filthy, with piles of full trash bags lining the wall. The air had a rotting odor within it and got stronger as I continued to walk with the lady. We reached a door, and as she opened it, I was hit with a putrid stench. The old lady seemed unfazed, but I was gagging. She turned to me and asked me if I was okay. I coughed a bit more, and after a minute, I managed to compose myself. I assured her I'll get things fixed and walked into the room. The bathroom was small. Just like the rest of the apartments, it hadn't been cleaned in ages. I looked at the bathtub, and the bottom was filled with about 6 inches of jet black water. I set my tool bag onto the floor and rummaged inside to find my drain auger. I set the tip of the long coil into the dark water where I thought the drain would be. There was no resistance, but the coil sank deeper and deeper. I began to slowly crank the auger and the coil twisted, but the water still motionless. Confused, I tried to retract the drain auger, but it wasn't coming up. I stood up and pulled, but there was no give. I let out a sigh as I rolled up my left sleeve. I got on my knees beside the tub. The smell was absolutely horrendous. I cleared my mind and plunged my left arm into the dark water. My hand went through. The water felt like sludge, as if I was putting my hand through ink and it was ice cold. I pushed down and noticed that I had submerged most of my forearm inside the water. There was no way this tub was that deep. What the fuck? Before I finished my words, I felt something grab my hand and yank me. My right hand grabbed the edge of the tub, and I managed to stop myself before I got pulled inside the water. Whatever had a hold of my left hand was not letting go, and it continued to attempt to pull me. I resisted, the black water splashing up everywhere, causing beads of darkness to cover the bathroom. I pulled my arm, and then I heard a pop. I let out a scream as a sharp pain exploded from my left shoulder. The old lady called out, asking me if I was okay, but I continued to cry in pain. Whatever was inside this pitch black water was going to take my arm off. I managed to prop a leg onto the edge of the bathtub and push with it, giving me enough strength to slowly pull my arm up. I clutched on my slumped left arm with my right and pulled. A wave of relief hit me when I saw my hand, but it turned to pure terror when I saw a thin, bony hand grasping mine. The other hand, still grasping mine, came up and emerged from the water as an arm, shoulder, then the face of an old man. His face was bloated. He stared at me with empty gray eyes, and his mouth was open in a silent scream. I called out for help, and when I turned to look out the door, I saw the old lady staring towards us in fear. "Robert? My Robert?" she muttered under her breath. The old man's gaze shifted towards the lady, and he let go of my hand to reach towards her. I stumbled backwards and slammed into the bathroom sink. The lady shuffled towards the bathtub, and she called out to him. "I'm so sorry, Robert.
I couldn't hear you call out to me. I couldn't hear you drain."
She slowly outstretched both her arms, and the old man grabbed them. Before I knew it, she was pulled so violently. She made a loud thud as her legs hit the edge of the tub. She didn't have a chance to scream as she was quickly submerged inside the black water. The water bubbled and then silence. Slowly the water sank through the drain, and eventually all the pitch black water disappeared. When I asked the genie for a companion animal that would live as long as I would, and that would be loyal, cuddly, and as sweet as any other pet, I felt smug imagining a puppy that would easily live 50 years by my side. Imagine my horror when I opened my eyes to find a wide-eyed, big-eared, sweet, and adorable baby Virginia possum sitting in my lap, staring up at me with love. The Haunting of Willowbrook Manor, A Descent into Darkness, by Many Definitions 6775. It was an innocent decision, or so I thought. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural, drawn to the eerie tales that sent shivers down my spine. Little did I know that my curiosity would lead me down a path of terror and despair, into the heart of an otherworldly nightmare. It began when I stumbled upon an obscure ad in a local newspaper. Seeking brave souls, Willowbrook Manor, the most haunted house in the country. The allure was undeniable, and against my better judgment, I decided to embark on this perilous journey. Arriving at Willowbrook Manor, I was greeted by an imposing Victorian mansion, shrouded in an ominous mist, its dilapidated facade alluding to an air of desolation and decay. Despite the chill in the air, I felt an inexplicable warmth tugging at my insides, urging me to explore its haunted halls. Stepping through the creaking double doors, I was enveloped in a suffocating darkness that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The air was thick with a tangible sense of foreboding. As I cautiously made my way through the labyrinth of corridors, I could hear distant whispers and disembodied footsteps echoing from unseen corners. Rooms that had long been abandoned sprung to life, each with their own spectacle inhabitants. The spirit of a tormented artist, forever trapped in the pursuit of his masterpiece. The ghostly echoes of a child's laughter, accompanied by the phantom cries of a grieving mother. Shadows danced along the walls, mocking my feeble attempt to escape their clutches. The nights were the worst. As the moon bathed Willowbrook Manor in an ethereal glow, the spirits grew restless, their presence intensifying. The walls seemed to breathe, and the paintings that lined them twisted and contorted into macabre scenes. The anguished cries of the damned resonated through the halls, sending chills down my spine. Sleep became a distant memory as nightmares plagued my every moment. Visions of apparitions with hollow eyes, their spectacled fingers caressing my soul. Dreams of being trapped in a never-ending maze pursued by nameless horrors. Each night was an endless descent into darkness, robbing me of my sanity. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself spiraling deeper into the clutches of the Willowbrook Manor. The line between reality and the supernatural blurred, leaving me questioning my very existence. The spirits seemed to feed off my fear, growing stronger with each passing day. I sought solace in online communities, sharing my experiences and searching for answers. But all I found were others trapped in their own haunted nightmares, their lives forever intertwined with the malevolent forces that plagued Willowbrook Manor. It was a curse that bound us together, a collective suffering that no one else could comprehend. Now, as I sit here in flickering candlelight, writing this desperate account, I can feel the presence of the spirits closing in. Their icy breath caresses my neck, whispering promises of eternal torment. I know that escape is impossible, that I am forever condemned to wander the halls of Willowbrook Manor, a prisoner of my own curiosity. So, dear listener, heed my warning. If you ever come across an invitation to Willowbrook Manor, cast it aside. From within its walls lies a darkness that will consume your very soul, and once you enter, there is no turning back. After I died, I traveled up a long tunnel towards a bright light, and when I reached it, I could feel myself being reborn into a new body. As I opened my tiny eyes for the first time, I looked around, only to see myself emerging from an egg casing with a dozen or so other baby cockroaches. The Great Joy of Locusts by Saturdead. My grandfather, Edgar Eddie Hurrence, passed away in early February. This was the man who inspired me my whole life and encouraged me to pursue whatever whims I was passionate about. When I wanted to be an astronaut, he sent me to space camp. When I wanted to be a soccer player, he got me my first pair of cleats. So, years later, when I wanted to get into aerospace engineering, there was no questions about it. He was there to help. He knew I'd eventually find my way, and that the best thing to do was to encourage me to try and push myself further. I found great success in my work, and I've always been grateful to Eddie for his ceaseless enthusiasm. So when I heard about his sudden deteriorating health, I dropped everything. When you get to your 80s, things can change at a drop of a hat. There is nothing more terrifying than the human condition. But the story I'm about to tell you comes close. I took care of Eddie those last few weeks of his life. We wanted him to be able to spend that time at home with friends and family, and we did whatever we could to make that happen. But Eddie had plans. He didn't want to spend time at home. He wanted to travel one last time. He had this strange idea to go to this little town in South Dakota. I couldn't figure out why, but he was determined. He got this strange shimmer in his eyes whenever he spoke about it. "I gotta go," he said. "Please, I just gotta go." It was a small town northeast of Rapid City. You could barely see it on a map. You could see the houses, but there was no name to it. That's how I got to know about Locust, South Dakota. Eddie died 2 weeks ahead of his planned trip to Locust. His passing was sudden, devastating, and confusing. I never heard him talk of that place before, and there was no real explanation as to why he wanted to go there. So I decided as a final show of gratitude to spread his ashes there. I made a reservation at a motel and drove out there over the weekend. There was no information about the motel I was staying at, what the buildings in the town were used for, or who lived there. It was a whole town of question marks. Not because of anything being hidden, but because no one cared to look closer. This was the kind of town that was just a bunch of houses by the side of the road. The kind of place you pass by, only ever asking yourself who lives in a place like this to begin with. But when the time came, I carefully packed Eddie's bronze urn and took it to the road, not knowing what to expect. I'd never been to South Dakota before. On the first day driving through Rapid City, there was this violent snowfall that almost threw me off the road. Going up to Locust was about as flat terrain as it gets, the endless fields of snow stretching for miles. Not that you could see that far because of the weather, but still. The first night in Locust wasn't anything special. I arrived pretty late, got myself a gas station hot dog from across the street, and crashed in my room. The owner seemed nice enough, a soft-spoken elderly woman called Dottie, who was eager to make sure I had everything I needed for my stay. I crawled into bed, watched some TV, and fell asleep. I left Eddie's urn out. He loved watching late-night television. I figured he'd appreciate me leaving it on. The weather had cleared up by morning. The sun reflecting off the fresh snow was blinding, and there was this awkward humidity in the air. It was still cold, but wearing a jacket made me feel sticky, like a warm ham in a plastic bag. Awful. I brought my backpack, taking Eddie along. I was going to check out the town, ask a few questions, and try to figure out why Gramps wanted to go here so badly. Dottie, the owner, was up early. She asked me all about my plans, if I slept all right, if the water pressure in my shower was okay. I got the impression she didn't see a lot of new people. "I'm actually here for my grandpa," I said. Before I had a chance to elaborate, Dottie lit up like a candle, her smile growing wider and a laugh bubbling up. "How exciting," she said. "Wait, don't tell me. You're Donnie's boy, right? Or is it Hector?" "No, sorry, I wasn't clear. My grandpa never made it here." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," she sighed. "I'm sure he would have loved our little town." "It's strange," I said. "I don't think he's ever been here. Why would he be so eager to visit?" "None of us have been to heaven either," she said. "But we still wish to see it." She laughed it off and took me to a small dining room. Fresh bacon, eggs, and coffee. A little slice of heaven right there. Dottie had a few of the guests that morning. An old couple and a woman in a wheelchair. Just people from the neighborhood, it seemed. The woman in the wheelchair had an oxygen tank and a white mask covering half her face, which she carefully removed to put tiny pieces of pancake in her mouth. She winced with every bite. I first mistook her for an older woman, but on closer inspection, she was close to my age. I was seated straight across from her, at an opposite table. Dottie sat down with me halfway through my breakfast under the guise of offering me a refill for my coffee. "I'm sorry about your grandfather," she said. "Was it sudden?" "It was his time," I nodded. "We just thought we had a little more left." "Terrible," Dottie sighed, shaking her head. "But the Lord knows when our time is due." "Yeah, well, Eddie wasn't really a good friend of the church." "Nonsense, we're all friends here." As she left the table, I found myself staring into the eyes of the woman at the opposite table, a thin gray membrane covering her eyes, as the machine pumped air into her lungs. But there, deep inside her dying orbs, was a strange shimmer, something I recognized from the many hours I spent with my grandfather. She knew something. She'd seen something. Something. I went back up to my room and got my things. I got Eddie's urn, put it in my backpack, and double-checked my email. I still had a life to attend to, even if I'd taken some time off for Eddie's sake. There were meetings being planned, Zoom calls to attend, never-ending spreadsheets. I was in a different headspace, thinking about the practicalities, so when I came face to face with the elderly couple I'd seen downstairs, my mind sort of blanked. They were standing literally outside my door, about to knock. They seemed just as surprised as I was. "Oh, hi," the old man said. "Haven't seen you around before." "Can I help you?" I asked. "We heard you were talking to, Dottie," the man continued, "about your grandfather." "All right, yeah, he passed recently." The two of them nodded and looked at one another. "There's someone you ought to talk to." Not knowing what to expect, I agreed to come along. They seemed harmless enough, and I didn't know where to begin with this town. Not that there was much to see. We took a long walk to the east side of town, past the gas station and supermarket. I could see the town church in the distance, blending into the white of the snow. The cemetery was on the other side of the hill. There were a few houses lining the side of the town, and at the far end of the road was a mansion made of eggshell white brick. There was a red mailbox with the name Saffron printed in large letters. Walking up to the door, an old man stepped out to greet us. He looked to be in his early 70s. He had a full head of long hair, a bright white and fully starched shirt, and a prominent gold cross necklace. The couple introduced me to him.
"This is Joel," they said. "I'm sure he can straighten things out."
I shook his hand, and we looked at each other for a few seconds in complete silence. Finally, I gave him my name.
"I'm so thankful for you to be here," he smiled. "I'm sure you have many questions."
Joel invited me into his house. The couple asked me to have a blessed day and disappeared into the bright winter sun. Joel offered me a glass of water and sat me down by the kitchen table. He had a spotless house except for some dead bugs in a windowsill. But everything had this slight smell of either detergent or chemical lemon. There was also a slight reverb to everything I did and said. I showed Joel my grandfather's urn and explained what happened. I told him about this mysterious obsession with the town and this absolute determination to see it before his passing. Joel just looked at me, nodding. He was very easy to talk to and was eager to ask follow-up questions. Finally, he took the urn gently and looked at it.
"I was in a similar predicament," he said. "But the good Lord decided to keep me around for a few more years. Praise be."
"So, what was it that drove you here?" I asked. "Why this place?" Joel thought about it carefully and put the urn down. He cleaned it with a napkin.
"I raced a lot of horses back on my ranch in Minnesota," he said. "Beautiful place. Had these fields of sunflowers with the same colors as the sky. Looking out on a hazy morning as the sun rose, you might think you're looking into heaven."
"But with those horses grazing on the clouds?" I smiled. Joel grinned. He patted me on the shoulder, nodding enthusiastically.
"I like that. Yes, like the horses grazing on the clouds above. What a gorgeous view."
He turned in his seat, looking over at the urn, and lowered his voice. Slowly, his smile faded.
"But horses have this amazing ability," he said. "They know when their time is over. They know when it's time for them to leave us behind to begin their journey to the pale beyond. They leave the comfort of their friends and family, walk into the field and die, face the sun as they fade."
I never knew that.
"You won't read about that on your phone. Gotta talk to ranchers to know these things."
Joel smiled, tapping the side of his temple.
"But they know, and so many other animals do too. They don't contemplate what has been or what will be. They just know what must be done, and they do it."
Joel got up and showed me around. He had this spacious living room with a large cross covering an entire section of the wall. It looked hand-carved, as from a single piece of wood.
"But people are blessed with the gift of foresight, a gift to perceive things that haven't been, to remember things that have not happened to us, but to our forefathers. We imagine, we empathize, and when our time comes, we are conflicted with what has been and what will be, and we don't look to what currently is."
Isn't that a mindfulness? The idea of it?
"Yes,"
Joel interrupted.
"Of perceiving and living in the now, To so many of us, it just cannot be. Instead, we are filled with this terrible dread, this awful, hysterical fear of not knowing.
Joel took a step towards me, looking at Eddie's urn.
But passing away is easy as breathing, and I chose to believe in a world where we do not need to fear what comes naturally. Why should we fear dying any more than we fear being born or falling in love?
Joel carefully took Eddie's urn from me, placing it on a coffee table in front of the large cross. He looked up.
Sometimes people find that peace within themselves. They find that moment where they know their time is coming. And those people, much like my horses, find themselves drawn away from friends and family to a place where they're supposed to be. And that place is here. That's it, right here.
This is the place? This is where people go to die?
Not all people, mind you, said Joel. But yes, many are drawn here. And when their time comes, this is where they choose to leave the world behind.
Joel looked up at the cross, his eyes shimmering.
Admiring the rising sun, grazing on a cloud of their own, ready to take their own peace among God's little wheat.
I spent the afternoon with Joel, listening to his ideas and his story. Turns out he had a condition where his brain could suffer a sudden aneurysm. He lived, as he described it, on a constant balance of life and death, where he could drop dead at any second. And in that state of living, everything in the world pulled him to this place in time. Locust, South Dakota. He showed me a few articles about the town. The earliest mention of it were from the 1910s, when they built the church. The cemetery was built on top of a drained lake. There were little articles mentioning the town in passing, but it was just fluff pieces. Anniversaries, weddings, church events. The first real headlines came in the 60s during the cult craze, but it sort of faded over time. People were looking closely at all the off-map gatherings, but most agreed that the town of Locust were just particular, not heretical. But there was this one picture that I couldn't get out of my mind. This article from the 70s, when I could see dozens of people standing in a field, raising their arms to the sky in unison. They looked like scarecrows. Records speak about 10 to 30 people travel to Locust every year or so just to pass away. Most come from surrounding counties, but a few come all the way from Canada or northern Mexico. Joe told me about this one man who traveled all the way from Germany just to drop dead the moment he stepped inside the city limits. Later that day, we wandered back to the motel. Joel offered to treat me to Dottie's home-cooked meal. On the way there, I asked him a question that seemed obvious in hindsight.
So, why is this town called Locust? Some consider it a misheard Locacodan word. Okus, meaning warm. I think it's a bit more complicated.
Then, what do you think? Joel let the words sink in, and he looked up at the sky. The sun had already set, and the stars were coming out.
He spoke, and the locusts came, young locusts without number, said Joel. I love that verse. It reminds me that it's the word of God that brings the locusts. But in order for them to be brought, one has to listen. To hear the word of God, the locusts had to hear it spoken. But the locusts can't listen.
I'm sorry, but that hardly makes sense.
Don't you see?
Joel smiled.
We are the locusts. How else could we hear the word? How else could we be brought?
That's an interpretation.
I believe it to be a synonym of sorts. A word meaning a sin or a sinful person. And that this, the town of Locust, is a place where one leaves their sin behind as we move beyond.
Sitting down to eat with Joel and Dottie, I got the impression that this man was loved throughout the town. He was well-spoken, generous, and intensively friendly. The only one who didn't seem to warm up to his presence was the woman in the wheelchair with the oxygen tank, who seemed to shy away from everyone. I could see that twinkle in her eyes still. Maybe that's the look you get when you know your time is up. I spent the rest of the day in the company of Joel and Dottie. We had a long talk about the town's history and the various people who passed through over the years. Apparently, most people who died there are cremated, and the nearby graveyard has been full for years. So seeing that I brought Eddie in an urn was fitting somehow. Joel had already bought an urn for himself. He had no living relatives to care for his remains, so he didn't want to inconvenience anyone having to pay for them. By the end of the evening, I was walking under the starry sky with Joel and contemplating things that would come to be. I felt something, a little tug in my chest, this tiny strand leading directly to my heart to the field of locusts. I was feeling it, that distinct pull. Was I, too, about to die? What was supposed to be a weekend trip ended up being an entire week. I took time off just to get in touch with myself. I couldn't bring myself to say goodbye to Eddie yet. I'd do that on my last day. Instead, I spent my time getting to know the people of the town. Garland and Hannah, the elderly couple who introduced me to Joel, an older woman named Margaret, who idolized her late husband to the degree where she kept a shrine. There was a Masood who came all the way from Atlanta after he got his lung cancer diagnosis. There were about a dozen others that I noticed in passing, only getting to know them by name, but most of the days I spent listening to Joel. While I didn't care much for his impromptu sermons, I could appreciate his positive tone. It was comforting in a way, knowing something benevolent wanted me to be here at such a trying time. But the woman in the wheelchair never warmed up to me or Joel. I learned that her name was Erin, and that she had about a dozen chronic health issues. She was one of the few locals who was born and raised in Locust, as if she was never meant to leave. For all the people I talked to, not one had anything good to say about her. At best, they ignored her.
"Strange girl," Dottie said once. "She has wanted to leave this town for years, but her body couldn't take it. So she just sits and waits. Out of all the people, one would think she would want to be here."
One morning, as Dottie had gone to get bacon, I found myself alone with Erin in the dining room. As she removed her mask to place a piece of pancake in her mouth, I moved over to her table. She barely noticed. Once she did, she coughed. This awful, wheezing rattle. I introduced myself and asked if she wanted any help.
"No," she wheezed. "I'm fine."
"I heard you're not quite the fan of this town as most others," I said. "Is that right?"
"Right,"
she said, steeling herself for another shot at her pancake.
"Fuck this town."
"Seems all right to me," I shrugged. "What's so bad about it?" She gave me a long look, as if trying to figure out if I was trained to be this dumb or if it was a natural talent. Finally, she shook her head.
"God doesn't live in that fucking field,"
she said.
"Whoever the fuck those people are praying to, it isn't divine."
She had a point. Most people praised the town as some sort of holy ground, that it was special, that it was this magical place where people were supposed to be at the end of their life, that it was something beautiful and spiritual. But for people like Erin, who just want to live, it's a cruel taunt. When your entire life revolves around your death, you start to curse being born. And the more I thought about it, the more the knot in my chest tightened. It didn't feel like a calling anymore. It felt like a trap, like a spider pulling me in, rather than guiding light leading the way. I empathized with Erin. If that was how she felt all the time, there was no wonder she resented that town. I decided to cut my extended visit short. I checked out the next morning, a few days ahead of what I paid for. Dottie didn't understand and was eager to clear up whatever problem I'd encountered. I tried to explain that my time there was over and that I needed to return to my own life. Dottie seemed crushed, as if she couldn't understand why anyone would want to leave. This was, after all, the place where we all would end up eventually. Why leave? Why not just get comfortable? Still, I got in my car. Dottie protested as I backed out of the driveway and broke the speed limit on my way out. I could imagine Erin smiling for the first time in years, knowing I left town because of her. But that tug in my chest grew stronger, insistent. My pulse rose. My body was trying to figure out why I was going the wrong way, like diving deeper when I needed to come up for air. I kept coming back to the same thought over and over. If this was the end station, why leave? Why not just stay and face my maker? To shed my sin, my locus, and rest pure in this perfect little town. I had to pull over. My pulse was going crazy, and I clutched my chest. It ached, setting red strains of pain pulsing through my arms. I closed my eyes to keep the tears in. Then I got a text. It was from Dottie. Apparently, I'd forgotten my grandfather's ashes. I came rolling back to the motel like a shamed dog. There was a whole bunch of people waiting for me in the parking lot. Joe was there, holding Eddie's bronze urn. They all looked at me with nothing but joy on their faces, like a lamb returning to the herd. They wanted me here. They wanted me to belong, and damn it all, there was intense relief being back. I parked and got out. Joel placed the urn on the roof of my car and wrapped me up in a big hug. The others awed and oohed.
"We're gonna miss you," Joel said. "Are you sure you have to leave?"
"I have to do what I came for," I said. "Eddie wanted to be here, not me."
"Then I suppose we ought to get to church," said Joel. "What better place to lay to rest?"
Eddie wasn't a big church guy.
"Then maybe the hill overlooking the graveyard?" added Dottie. "It's beautiful up there."
I thought about it. It wasn't quite the picture I imagined in my head when thinking about Eddie, but if that's what he wanted, that's what he'd get.
"It's never too late," said Joel. "Not for him, not for you. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away, and look, new things have come."
"Corinthians," added Garland.
"Praise be."
We made our way through town, picking up more people as we went along. It was another beautiful day. The sun had started to melt in places, making the slush sink into my shoes. Some of those coming along had started singing psalms. Joel, on the other hand, seemed only to want to help.
"Excuse them," he whispered. "They're just so eager to see someone join our congregation."
"I'm not joining you," I said.
"I know," nodded Joel, "but he is."
He tapped the side of Eddie's urn, and I got this sinking feeling like I was doing something terrible. I couldn't help but to think of what Erin had said. God doesn't live in a field, so what the hell were we about to do, and for whom? We made our way off the road, continuing across a mushy field of melting snow. The others were singing loudly and proudly, making the iron ball in my gullet grow. I felt sick. Still, part of me felt like this was the right place to be. But it felt right in an almost artificial sense, the same way a hot plate of French fries can be the best thing in the world, but you wouldn't want that forever. We finally got to the hill overlooking the church. There was this big Jupiter tree casting some morning shade on us, and I saw this vast clutter of tombstones below. For a town this small, the graveyard was enormous. The modest church was dwarfed next to it. As I took hold of the urn, I wanted to let Eddie go and be done with it. I wanted to do this and just leave, never looking back. I could live my life ignoring the pull to come back. That wouldn't be a problem. At least, I hope so. But at that moment, I was struggling to keep calm. Then Joel grabbed me by the arm.
"Let's take him closer to the cemetery," he said. "Maybe you'll change your mind."
"I don't think I will, Joe."
"A walk never hurts anyone,"
he smiled.
"You got legs. Use them."
He took me down to the cemetery as the others were singing to the full extent of their hearts. Even Dottie had joined in, her usual quiet voice booming with certainty. Joel led me by the arm, waving through the tombstones. Then, suddenly he stopped. He raised a hand.
"Can you feel it?"
he asked.
"Can you feel this place?"
I don't know what to feel. I couldn't tell him the truth. I felt ill, like my body was revolting. I cursed Aaron for putting that thought in my head, that this place wasn't what it's supposed to be, that there was something wrong, unholy at play.
"I deserted you for a brief moment, but will take you back with great compassion," sighed Joel. "We all have doubts, but this is the right decision. This is his place. This is his home."
I closed my eyes, the song reaching a fever pitch. Joel strengthened his grip on my arm. I turned the lid of Eddie's urn and felt the world shift. Something waiting to receive him, to welcome him.
"I will repay you for the years the swarming locust ate," spoke Joel. "The young locust, the destroying locust, the devouring locust, my great army that I sent against you." "Praise be," added Massaz. "Praise him."
And they praised him. They cheered him. They hollowed and raised their hands to the sky. And as I turned the lid, there was this weight building in my chest, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed this release. I needed to move on. Then I heard a strange noise, a beeping of sorts, an insistent machine-like beeping. It was Erin, using her electronic honk of her wheelchair to grab my attention. She just sat there, staring at us. Not disappointed, not angry, just terrified. And for that brief moment, there was no shimmer in her look. She was just a scared girl, hoping against hope that I get my mind in order. All around me, I saw these people looking at me with dilated eyes, mouths open like animals waiting to bite, their arms shivering with excitement. And under my feet, the ground moved. It was subtle, but it was there, a bulge moving just beneath the earth, going from grave to grave, something massive, eagerly awaiting an offering. I looked up at Joel, still clenching my arm, and for the first time, I could see him clearly. This was a sickly man. He wasn't just old, he was ancient. I could see the outline of his skull, the lining of the veins reaching the end of his jaw muscles. He was more bone than man, his sunken eyes blackened with rot.
"Let go,"
Joel wheezed.
"Pass him on."
Skeletal fingers wrapped around my arms, poking into my skin, beige teeth struggling to hide behind razor-thin lips. The cross around his neck, nothing but gold-colored nickel. How had I not seen this? I turned the lid back on tight and shrugged him off. There was an immediate gasp from the crowd.
"What are you doing?"
yelled Dottie. Masad got angry. Hannah and Garland snarled like animals. Margaret wielded her walking stick like a sword. And behind them were the nameless crowd we'd gathered on our way there, most of which barely even looked human. Some were little more than bone and sinew, others were so pale their skin seemed translucent. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Aaron beeped again, snapping me to attention. Clutching the urn tight, I tried to push my way past Joel and burst into a sprint. He tripped me, and I dropped the urn. Luckily, the lid held tight. Bronze doesn't break easily. I fell flat on my stomach as the ground beneath me moved. As the bulge buckled, a crack in the ground revealed something underneath. A pulsing, segmented body, white as snow, covered in thick mucus. It bobbed back and forth like the abdomen of a wasp. It stank of dog's breath. It must have been at least 7 feet wide. A hand gripped my ankle, dragging me back into the crowd. Joel stood ahead of me, lifting the urn.
"You have already committed him," he said. "You can't go back on your word. A bond has been made, and the price must be paid. Would you deny your loved one's salvation?"
I struggled, hands grasping me, lifting my head, forcing me to watch. The iron ball in my stomach felt like an egg ready to hatch. I wanted to beg for forgiveness, but not from whatever god they praised, but from my grandpa. I shouldn't have taken him here to begin with. I should have known better. Joel held the urn high, speaking at the top of his lungs.
"But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come on you, and you will be my witness in Jerusalem, in all of Judea and Samaria."
He leaned down and looked me in the eye, to the cheers of the ghostly mass of those dying and those that had long since passed. And I knew in that moment that this wouldn't end with Eddie. This wouldn't end until I was part of their congregation, dead in the ground. Joel smiled, knowing that I finally understood.
"And,"
he grinned,
"to the ends of the earth."
There was a metallic clang. I felt hands release me as the congregation panicked. There, right behind Joel, was Erin. She'd gotten up from her chair, hobbled all the way over, and whacked him over the head with her oxygen tank. As Joel crumbled to the ground, they let me go. I managed to twist free, picking up Eddie's urn as I got up. I hurried towards Erin, leaning her against me. She barely weighed anything. We looked at the crowd of devotees, staring us down with animal intent. They were horrified, angered, and beyond reasoning. There was no doubt that these people would tear us to pieces for our transgressions. There were more of them now, so many more. Joel lifted a finger towards us, cradling the back of his bleeding skull.
"You,"
he cursed.
You've denied him. You've resented him. You've come bearing false witness. You."
A rumble. A low, deep rumble. Then a buzz. A locust. It landed on my arm, then took off, but the entire congregation just stared, awestruck. The silence that crept up on us was so intense. I could hear the wind in the Jupiter tree on the hill. Then I saw them. Hundreds of locusts crept out of the ground. In the cracks where the thing beneath had broken through, they escaped. Joel had promised it a meal, but it had been denied. And that wouldn't stop it, however. It hungered. It would eat, no matter what or whom. The locusts first started crawling up Joe's leg, then Dottie's. On Masad, they started with his hands. Margaret had them crawling on her neck. Hannah and Garland held each other, keeping the song alive. I saw the first drops of blood in the snow. There was a sudden jolt as the ground shifted. Joel's foot sank into the earth with a sickening crunch. He looked down, then back up at me, his bone-like face aching to a smile.
"Joy,"
he screamed.
"Joy to be chosen."
Erin tapped my shoulder, reminding me to do what came most natural, to run. The cemetery erupted. Thousands of locusts swarmed the air, tearing the congregation to pieces, stripping them of their clothes, their skin, their hair. I could hear them choking as a swarm of creatures forced themselves down their throats. But there were no screams, just songs and praises, joyous laughter as they held one another, thanking whatever God may be. But in seconds, their songs were drowned with pitter-patter of air-thin wings, and as we ran, despite being 30 feet away, I could still feel the ground shift. Aaron kept smacking me on my arm, like trying to get a racehorse to go faster. As I got Aaron to her wheelchair, the entire cemetery was engulfed in a mixture of gray and brown, like a descending cloud, a filthy, buzzing cloud, tearing everything into base components, stripping everyone of their identity and purpose. All the while, Joel was laughing. His deathly smile never faded as he sunk into the earth, the greatest joy of his life, to be devoured by whatever god he praised, chunk by chunk. I got bitten 12 times in less than a minute. I didn't even know locusts could do that. Erin had them stuck in her hair, in her oxygen mask, everywhere. We tried to brush them off as I hurried down the hill, back to the motel. By the time we got to my car, the swarm had already descended from the church. These things were everywhere. I could hear them smacking into the windows of the motel with a rhythmic tapping. There was no question about getting Erin out of here. She was coming with me. I dropped her into the passenger seat and started folding up her wheelchair. She smacked me again, accidentally brushing off a biting locust.
"Leave it," she wheezed. "Let's go."
There was a dozen in the car with us, but we had to go. I could hear them rattling in the air conditioning. For the second time that day, I backed out of the driveway and broke the speed limit. On my way out of town, I felt that tug in my heart, that thing in me telling me that I was misunderstanding everything, that I was letting myself down, that I was breaking a holy convent, and that some things were not meant to be understood by people like me. That there was a reason that the first thing angels said when they reveal themselves to mortals was not to be afraid. My chest ached. A red pulse forced me to blink. Sweat stung my eyes. Erin placed a hand on mine. All she had was half an oxygen tank, and a way out of town that seemed more than enough.
"I'm scared too," she said. "Keep going."
So I did. We were halfway to Rapid City when I slowed down, easing my cramped foot. The locust had died. My mind was quiet. Eddie's urn rests carefully on Erin's lap, and as I looked over at her, I saw the gray membrane clear from her eyes. She took off the oxygen mask, breathing freely, and smiled. This was some time ago. I don't expect everyone to believe me, but if you look it up, Locust, South Dakota is still there. Maybe new people have moved in, others who felt the call. I found the perfect spot for Eddie. There's this place not far from his childhood home where you can watch the fishermen bring in the catch of the day. All year long you can smell fresh crab stew, Eddie's favorite. I knew he'd love it there. At first, I thought Erin was going to die. Turns out many of her problems weren't as bad as we imagined. Sure, she had some muscle atrophy from spending years in that chair, but physical therapy would go a long way. Apparently, there'd never been anything wrong with her eyes, and her lung problems were inconclusive. The doctor feared it was some sort of perpetual allergy reaction, probably to insect bites. Away from that town, Erin looks to make an almost full recovery. I don't know what to make of all this. I think there are plenty of reasons for people to go to places and find comfort in their beliefs. I think there are good reasons for us to deal with what we are and what we will become. Much like all the people on Locust, we find our comforts in knowing we belong in this world, even when we're gone. Thinking back on all this, I think Joel was right about one thing. That leaving this life behind is nothing to be feared. That it's as natural as being born or falling in love. That it is reasonable to have faith in a merciful and benevolent Creator, whatever form that might take. But I know that none of that benevolence and none of that mercy lived in the town of Locust, South Dakota. After months of my daughter being distant from the two of us, my husband and I rejoiced when she agreed to a family game night of Cluedo. Putting down her piece, she said to us,
"The teenager in the bathroom with a coat hanger."
I hate Christmas after this happened. By Glittering Return 316. This happened to me when I was 13. I always used to love the holidays, especially Christmas. I guess it's because I love getting gifts like every other kid. Don't judge me, but I come from a wealthy family. We lived in a beautiful 2-level, 5-bedroom, 6-bathroom home on Long Island, New York. My sister and I go to a private school, and we take several vacations a year. Yes, we are spoiled. My parents both work high-paying jobs doing who knows what, but it brings in money, so who cares? What happened on Christmas Eve when I was 13 really made me dread the holidays. I still have nightmares about it. This is my scary Christmas story. On December 21st, it was my sister Julia's birthday. She turned 9. Because it was so close to Christmas, my parents did not spoil her too much. So they just gave her Robux, like $100 worth of Robux. She was very happy and held on to the money until Christmas Eve. We always have family and my parents' friends come over on the eve for dinner and a party. Myself and Julia would stay in our rooms and just watch movies and play video games. Why would we want to hang out with family and their friends anyway? On Christmas Eve at 6 p.m., they all came over dressed in their best holiday threads, the women in their sparkly red and green gowns and the men in their black and white tux. As Julia and I were in my room playing Roblox, we heard all the chattering, the laughter, and the clinking of the fancy wine glasses. All seemed typical until we heard a loud scream from one of the guests. It sounded like a scream right out of a slasher movie. Julia and I jumped.
"What the hell was that?"
I asked her. Like she would know, she said,
"That sounded like Aunt Dee."
We just looked at each other in terror. I decided because I was older, I would go check things out. I slowly opened the bedroom door and walked towards the staircase leading to the living room, where the party was being held. Julia just peeked her head out the bedroom door and watched me, her eyes as big as saucers. She put her finger on her lips to tell me to be quiet. I looked down the stairs, and at the bottom of the steps was a pool of blood. Red blood. There was a commotion, and it sounded like people were panicking. They were asking each other what they should do. I ran to the kitchen where parents were. I asked what happened, who was hurt. My mother was just staring out into the backyard. She did not answer me. My father told me to go back upstairs. I demanded an answer. I mean, are we safe? Did someone break in and hurt one of the guests? Did you call the cops?
"Get upstairs!"
my father yelled. I ran like my life depended on it. I ran into my bedroom, locked the door, and grabbed Julie to stay close to me. We were confused and scared, our hands shaking. I asked Julie if she thought I should call 911 or just wait and see. She told me to call them now. Crap, my phone is downstairs. Give me yours. Julie ran into her room and got me her phone. As I was calling 911, our father came into our room and saw me. He told me to put the phone down. Do not call anyone. I told him I was calling for help. Why can't I call? He told us he was dealing with it, just to stay in the room. He looked very stressed, and he actually scared us with how intense he was being. We obeyed him. Once he left our room, we waited a few minutes, and I decided to go downstairs again to try to hear what they were doing. I will always regret making that decision. So I told Julie to stay in the bedroom and close the door. As I slowly walked down the steps and into the living room, I saw only 4 people huddled in a circle, whispering. The circle included my parents, our Aunt Dee, our Uncle Rob, and I ran into the kitchen and saw a trail of blood leading to the back door. My heart started to race, my hands were sweating, and I was frozen in place. I walked towards the back door and tried to see what was out there. I was hoping and praying it was from an animal, but I knew better. I walked out the door and followed the trail of blood. As I got near the end of the trail, I saw it. I couldn't believe it. What was supposed to be a fun, festive annual holiday party turned into a murder mystery I was trying to solve. Who was this person? I couldn't even tell if it was male or female. The blood, the stab marks. I heard the back door open, so I ran behind the shed to hide. The group of 4 came out and they stood over the body to decide what to do with it. They kept saying, "No police. What happened here tonight stays here." Once they agreed, my father backed his truck into the backyard, and they loaded it up into the bed of what used to be my favorite truck. While 3 of the murders left in the truck, my mother stayed burying the evidence, including the murder weapon. I came out of hiding and approached my mother. I asked her, "What happened? Please tell me." She started to cry and told me they had to kill our 40-year-old neighbor, Tim. I asked her why. He was always so nice to us. She said yes, because he liked Julie and had pictures of her on his phone. His bedroom window faced Julie's bedroom. The pictures on his phone showed Julie changing clothes, and some included her walking home from school. The group accidentally saw the pictures when Tim was showing them pictures of his family. Julie happened to be in the mix of photos. When my father saw the pictures, he snapped, grabbed the carving knife from the dining room table, and stabbed Tim multiple times. Obviously, if they called the police, my dad would go to prison, so they decided to bury Tim's body out in the woods where he would not be found. My dad has never been emotional or said I love you, but today he came and gave me a box of all his favorite things. He finally said he loved me, and I was able to go to bed tonight happy. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. By Justhegirlnextdoor. 'Twas a few weeks before Christmas when all through my office, the co-workers of my dead-end job decided to throw their annual Christmas party. Except this year, I was determined that none of them would live to celebrate this stupid festive season at all. In fact, I've been thinking about how I was going to pull off a mass murder for some time now. And our Christmas party was what finally switched on that light bulb in my head. But we'll get there in a moment. I need to plead my case so you don't think I'm a complete psychopath for what I'm about to tell you. After 2 years of constant bullcrap, I was fed up. I was sick and tired of being treated no better than a rat. Between endless coffee orders, picking up dry cleaning, disgruntled customer service, and cleaning up atomic explosions in the break room microwave, I was about on edge of snapping. And then I got an email from the over-preppy receptionist they had hired about a month ago. The crippling depression from working at this company still hadn't set in yet. Bless her heart. "Hey, office fam. I was told it was time to send out our annual office Christmas party email, so here are all the deets. Please join us for dinner this Thursday, December the 7th, 2023 at 6 p.m. This event will take place at Sonny Wilson's Steak Room, so please dress in formal attire. Instead of gift exchange this year, with permission from Dr. Jameson, I've decided to spice things up. Please bring a batch of cookies to exchange with everyone in attendance. At the end of the night, we should all leave with an assorted box of delicious goodies. Please RSVP to the Google invite ASAP. Reservation will need to be made, so I need head count by the close of the day if at all possible. Happy holidays and an even happier New Year. Per Dr. Jameson, please remember that the office will be closed December 20th to January 2nd to spend this delightful holiday season with our families. Be sure to thank him for his ample generosity by contributing to the gift basket that will be presenting to him at the party. Thanks, Talia Freeman. I was about to respond to another email when I heard the sound of a throat being cleared behind me. I know it sounds silly to know exactly who a person is based off such an insignificant action, but I knew exactly who it was, and he was the last thing I wanted to deal with right now.
Chrissy, could you clean up the microwave in the break room? I just cooked a can of raviolis and it exploded all over the place. Looks like a crime scene in there.
A sigh blew past my lips as I fought the urge to stab the person who was the constant culprit of this issue with the letter opener sitting on my desk.
Dr. Dawson, I've told you this before, but I'll remind you again. This is something that housekeeping does. Are you being short with me?
My fingers pinched the bridge of my nose as I turned in my chair to face the man. He looked like the epitome of daddy's money, and in a way, he was. Ever since he stepped foot into this office, Dr. Jameson had taken him under his wing as if he was his son. So, despite how badly I wanted to let my impulsive thoughts win, I pasted on a fake smile and stood for my chair.
No, I'm not. I'll go work on cleaning the microwave right now. That's what I thought.
The smirk that curled on his lip made the anger simmer within me almost bubble over into a boil.
Excuse me?
With a turn of my heel, I whipped around to face him.
You heard me,
he chuckled.
In fact, you'd make a pretty little maid. Come clean my house when you're done.
I shot him a glare before holding up a middle finger and storming off to the break room. But he wasn't done yet. I'd been in the break room for less than a minute before Dawson came strolling in, hands shoved into his suit jack pockets.
You know, Chrissy, I don't really appreciate that behavior.
The condescending tone of his voice was really rubbing me the wrong way, and I had a mile-long list of things I still needed to attend to. I really didn't have time for his silly charades today. So I simply chose to ignore him, reached into the cabinet under the sink and rifled through the clean supplies instead. When I stood up to set everything down on the counter, though, I was met with the incredibly imposing form of Dawson staying over me. Before I could even react, he had caged me in, forcing me back against the counter. Predator eyes roved over me, briefly glancing at my chest before meeting my eyes.
You know,
he stared.
It really is a shame that such a beautiful woman has to work so hard.
I sucked in a breath, shifting uncomfortably in my heels.
I guess a pretty face isn't worth much when it isn't smart, huh?
With a tap to the side of my head, he chuckled.
Too bad there isn't much that goes on up there.
His finger twirled a strand of blonde hair around his finger before he brushed his thumb over the fullness of my bottom lip.
I bet I know what you are good for, though.
My brows furrowed angrily as I swatted his hand away.
Don't touch me.
I ground the words out between clenched teeth, and my voice a deadly hiss.
Feisty,
he growled, a wicked gleam burning in his icy blue irises, his hands traveling down the length of my pencil skirt before giving my butt a rough smack. Before I even realized what I was doing, my hand flew up and I slapped the side of his face so hard that it stung. My chest heaved as I took large gulps of air. I was so livid that I was shaking. In a matter of seconds, his expression flickered between surprise, disbelief, and then anger. With a rough shove, one of his hands wrapped around my neck like a vine of ivory, creeping up the expanse of it before settling on my jaw. My head slammed into the back of the cabinet, the clean supplies clattering to the ground.
"You filthy little whore."
"Stop!" Both of us turned, slightly taken aback at the intrusion. It was the new guy. He was hired just a couple weeks ago, and had become a constant laughingstock in the office. His nickname of Santa's Little Helper quickly gained traction when Talia caught him working as Santa's meet and greet at the mall. It turned out they volunteered to work there on the weekends. Despite him dressing as one of the elves, he was well over 6 feet tall. I guess it was sort of ironic that the large man in the office spent some of his time dressed as something known to be short in his free time. I was never more thankful for his presence.
Listen, Nick, this is all a big misunderstanding."
Dawson backed away with his hands raised awkwardly, shifting in place before he rubbed the back of his neck.
"It didn't look like a misunderstanding."
Nick's tone was ice cold, slicing through the tension in the room and warning Dawson to stand down. A glare settled on his features, his jaw clenched as he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His gray dress shirt was stretched taut against the bulge of his biceps, the fabric strained against the expanse of his large, broad shoulders. Either I had never noticed, or I'd simply been too busy, but in the right light, Nick looked kind of threatening. Based on his physique alone, he could probably chew Dawson up and spit him out in less than a second.
"Look, I was just leaving."
"No, you're not." My eyes darted between the two men before landing back on Nick.
"Not until you clean that microwave."
Dawson bristled, clearly getting aggravated with his demands.
"Stop throwing your weight around, new kid. I'll tell Dr. Jameson." "Tell him what?"
Nick seethed.
"That you assaulted a coworker?"
Dawson's gulp was audible.
"Fine."
With a nod, Nick beckoned me towards him, but before I could even step past the threshold of the door, Dawson was quick to remind me of my status at this hellhole.
"Chrissy."
I paused mid-step, glancing briefly at Nick.
"I don't care what anyone in this office says,"
he spat.
"You're no more than a pathetic assistant that begs for breadcrumbs at the feet of a bunch of big shots who have degrees. You'll never amount to anything, and neither will Santa's little helper over there."
It took everything I had to bite back my anger. Nick simply chuckled and said,
"And you're nothing more than a lapdog."
Despite the fact that I appreciated Nick's help, Dawson was right. You see, the thing is, I never went to college. I grew up in a middle-class family, but my parents couldn't afford to pay for my education. I wasn't smart enough to get a rocket science scholarship, and my ACT scores were a measly 20. And besides, thinking about being so deep in debt that I have to eat ramen for the rest of my life made me sick to my stomach. Really, the only thing I had to rely on was my looks. My mom had always told me I was pretty, but sometimes, more often than not, I wish I had been born hideous in hopes of trading that in for some smarts instead. So, once I graduated, I worked a few reception jobs. Because I was young and blonde and fresh-faced, I was the perfect candidate. Flashing the customers a pearly white smile and scheduling appointments was a piece of cake. But then, I found myself in my current job. The company is stringy, so the pay is horrible. The only reason I took the job was because I hoped it would lead to some new opportunities. Instead, I've become a corporate slave who babysits educated adults that have to be told to push the reset button on the computer when it's acting a little funny. But I don't want any of you to think that because of my looks, I'm completely and utterly useless. Let's be clear on that. I'm really quite the opposite. In fact, my looks make for an excellent, inconspicuous cover. I may not have a degree, but I have an unusually strange amount of knowledge about toxicology, specifically the hardest poisons to detect. I have successfully used plenty of poisons like urethane glycerin, ricin, and coriander, but thallium sulfate is my favorite. Thallium sulfate is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and water-soluble. In fact, most doctors don't even think to test for thallium sulfate in the blood. And within 3 to 4 days of ingestion, you're deader than a doornail. Although Prussian blue is an antidote, 15 milligrams will easily take anyone out way before they realize what's going on. Considering the US has not manufactured thallium since 1984, though, this is not an easy drug to get your hands on. Luckily, I've got friends in low places. Now, why is any of this important? Remember how I mentioned that email at the start? Well, I made a very special batch of cookies, and I fully intend to make sure that my entire office learns the deadly consequences of underestimating a lowly assistant. Revenge never tasted so sweet, and those cookies will taste positively deadly. The rest of the week went on as it normally would, but I did notice that Nick had become more of a constant in my day-to-day work. On one hand, I appreciate how helpful he was, and was thankful for the breather, and on the other, I couldn't help but find it strange. I didn't know if I was just being paranoid or what, but something just felt off. In fact, I got the first warning sign when I walked into his cubicle around lunchtime today. I wish I wouldn't have got distracted and waved it off.
Yes, I've been closely monitoring.
Nick? My knuckles rapped against the side of the cubicle before I raised an eyebrow.
Did I just see you talking into the cufflink of your suit jacket?
I had definitely seen it, and he knew I had too. There was no covering up, so I was hoping he'd be honest.
I guess you did,
he chuckled coolly, spinning around in his chair to face me. The fact that he was so calm and collected by my questioning was strange.
Care to explain?
I arched a curious brow, my red-painted fingernails tapping the side of the cubicle anxiously.
Oh, I got a wireless Bluetooth speaker in my cufflink. Just some new tech that I got from Santa.
I eyed him suspiciously before laughing.
Santa?
My brow quaked upwards again, a disbelieving smile stretching across my lips. But I decided to play along, slightly amused.
And what does Santa want with you at work? I thought you only volunteered on the weekends.
A flicker of a smile tugged his lips before he stapled his fingers and released a dramatic sigh.
The North Pole never sleeps around this time of year. I'm incredibly busy these days.
Uh-huh. I shook my head, laughing again at his silly antics. The two of us had grown close, working hand in hand. He was a bit odd, but then again, so was I. Nick ran a hand through his hair, shooting me one of his prize-winning smiles before hitting me with a wink. I had to admit it. This man was honestly too attractive for his own darn good. The fact that he was a lowly assistant like me was mind-boggling. I felt like he should have climbed the top of the corporate ladder by now.
Believe it or not, Chris, but Santa sees and hears everything. And without the help of his team, he won't be able to get everything done in time for Christmas.
I playfully slapped his shoulder before rolling my eyes.
You're such a weirdo.
With a pause, I smirked and whispered,
So, am I on the naughty or the nice list this year?
It was admittedly a bit of a risky question, but the tension between us was undeniable. From the moment Nick had come to rescue me in the kitchen, both of us had been nearly inseparable. This was sure to give me some intel on whether he shared the same sentiments. If so, I could surely sway him from eating any of my special cookies at the Christmas party. I watched curiously as Nick stood from his chair and took a quick peek around. A large portion of the office had gone out for lunch together, and the others had their heads buried in their computers. An amused grin creeped across my lips when he sat back down, a playful expression melting across his features. With a tug, he pulled me back into his lap, brushing back a strand of hair before he whispered,
"Pretty sure you're on Santa's most wanted list."
I stiffened at his words. I poisoned more people than I had fingers and toes for at this point, and as far as I knew, I hadn't been caught. He couldn't know anything about this, right? I was always very careful. Change of location, change of hair color, new name, new clothes, all of it.
"Just kidding."
His eyes lit up mischievously as he studied my expression.
"But you have been very naughty."
My cheeks burned a bright red. With a light smack on his chest, I stood back up and straightened my dress.
"You dirty dog,"
I laughed. Later that night, as I stood in my kitchen with a mixing bowl in hand, I couldn't help but replay his words over and over in my mind. Before I left to go home, he had stopped me in the parking lot and asked to be my date for the Christmas party. Before I even realized what I was saying, the word yes flew past my lips. Little did I know, I was making a huge mistake. The next day flew by, catapulting me into my plans faster than I'd ever even anticipated. As I strolled past the front door of Sony's, the intoxicating smell of fine dining assaulted my nostrils. I felt like I stuck out like a sore thumb in my bright red dress, and Nick hadn't shown up to accompany me just yet. Everyone else was dressed in shades of black, white, and cream. These people were so incredibly boring. I didn't know if having a degree sucked the life out of you or something, but these colors sure were. Talia was dressed in a floor-length cream-colored gown, and despite her stunning red hair, the shade of that gown washed out her features in the worst way possible. I mean, it was Christmas for crying out loud, and not a single soul was dressed in red or green? By the time we were all seated and Mr. Jameson had raised a toast, I was admittedly getting nervous. Nick hadn't shown up, and I didn't really like talking to any of these snobs besides exchanging the obligatory pleasantries. As I waited for him to show, my eyes couldn't help but to glance over at my beautiful little Christmas cookies, glistening on the table in the center of the room. I generously coated them in sugar and dusted them with a bit of cinnamon. Talia was happily loading each one of them up into separate boxes for everyone to take home. It took everything I had to wipe the evil smile off my face.
"Chris?"
My head whipped around and my face lit up when I realized it was none other than Nick. But of course, before I could even get a word in, Dr. Dawson was swaggering towards the both of us.
"Do I sense a little workplace romance between you two? Rumor has it that Talia caught the both of you red-handed. Mentioned something about some unusual scans on the printer."
We both blushed, instantly embarrassed.
"I'd hate for Dr. Jameson to find out. Would that be a shame?"
Dawson smirked before slapping Nick on the shoulder.
"But we're cool, right?"
Nick flinched, brushing him off before wrapping a protective arm around my waist.
"Say, we're both sensible men, right? If you let me take her out for a spin, we can just forget that any of that happened."
My eyes zeroed on Nick's clenched fist, so I did the only thing I can think of. I intervened and offered him a cookie.
"Dawson,"
I chirped.
"why don't I take you over to the cookie table? I make some of the best, you know.
Dawson's eyes slid up to Nick's, a wicked smirk tugging at his lips before he reached out and took my hand.
I love that, actually. I'm sure Santa's little helper could spare some time away from his precious little present. Now, couldn't he?
Before Nick could even engage, I shot him a look and shook my head. Karma would deal with Dawson way before Nick needed to. I'd be sure of that. Dragging him over to the table, I shoved a cookie into his hands. I beckoned him to try a bite. The second his lips parted and took a bite, I felt that all too familiar feeling, that sickeningly sweet rush of adrenaline I got every time I killed someone. And this was no different. If I dosed these correctly, he would be dead before Monday even rolled around. Except that everything went downhill from here, metaphorically speaking. Well, and you're about to see, quite literally, the crap was about to hit the fan. Unbeknownst to me, something incredibly bizarre was about to go down, and my cookie would be the least of everyone's worries.
Tonight, I would like to end this Christmas party with a huge thank you to Mr. Jameson.
Tally was standing up from her seat, mid-clap, when a strange sound echoed around the room. My head instantly snapped in the direction of it, and so did everyone else's. There, hunched over the table, was a very sick-looking Dawson. Vomiting spew in his mouth like a geyser, chunks of his dinner splattering the pristinely white tablecloth in front of him. The two women co-worker he had been flirting with all night stood up and gasped. He was throwing up so profusely now that it was projectile. At this point, it was like something off of The Exorcism. The two slim brunettes were covered in thick, slimy goo. The both of them screamed in disgust or anger or maybe both, before blowing chunks themselves. It was complete and utter chaos, and I couldn't help but smile. That smile quickly disappeared the second he fell backwards onto another table, though. His body flopped like a fish and spasmed erratically. Glass shattered and silverware clattered to the ground. Damn it. The poison was saying it now. Anxiety hit me like a freight train. What if some others had eaten more than... Thump. Everyone's eyes darted to Mr. Jameson, his eyes rolling into the back of his head as he clutched his throat. He was choking and coughing, strange gargling sounds emitting from his mouth. Thick crimson rivulets gushed from his nose and mouth as he fell into a heap on the floor. These people were dropping like flies. Perhaps I calculated the dosage completely wrong. I couldn't be here. Gathering my skirts, I stood up from my seat and tried to rush past the chaos, but a woman the size of a whale had just wandered out in front of me, and the whole back of her dress was covered in... brown? But then it hit me. It was feces. The smell was overwhelmingly strong. It honestly smelled like something had crawled up her and died. I covered my nose, repulse melting across my features, when I watched it slide down her leg like a thickened chocolate syrup. This was nothing like I'd expected. The horror of what I'd done was hitting me in waves. If these people dropped in this restaurant, the authorities would have their eyes on the restaurant first, but then they would surely begin to question if it was something else. I needed to get out of there, and I needed to get out of there fast. I was just about to make it out the door before I felt someone grab the back of my elbow, spinning me on my heel. I came face to face with Nick. Relief settled over my face as I tried to drag him from the chaos that was continuing to ensue within the restaurant.
Chris.
I paused, my eyes searching Nick before they landed on the slight curve of his lips.
Did you enjoy your wine?
Huh?
Your wine,
he repeated with a nod.
Did you enjoy it?
My wine? What the heck are you going on about, Nick? This really is not the time to be a wine connoisseur. I really need to... And that's when I felt it, the slight tingling sensation dancing across the tip of my tongue. the numbness in my fingertips, the strange lightheaded feeling buzzing at the front of my head. My brows scrunched as I scrutinized his expression. I hadn't eaten a single cookie, but that's when it dawned on me.
It was you.
My words were slurred as I stumbled over them, hurriedly pushing them past my disbelieving lips. With a slight nod, he chuckled.
You like my handiwork, Chris? You and I are one and the same. Way more alike than you realized,
he whispered.
Cut from the same cloth.
What do you mean? I struggled to get my lips to form the words. Whatever he had slipped into my wine was currently working its magic as we spoke.
This is what happens when you don't pay those friends in low places, Chris.
My eyes widened large as saucers as his revelations slowly settled in. All those silly words he had been whispering to his cufflinks. They were code words. The North Pole was the black market, and Santa was the man that I still owed money to. Nick indeed was one of his little helpers, and he had finally found me. White-hot fear coursed through me as I shoved past the front door of the restaurant, falling into a heap on the ground. Nick was quick to scoop me up, walk us across the crosswalk, and move to his car so fast that it was making me dizzy. My head was swimming and my vision was going in and out of focus. I couldn't let him put me in that car. If he took me to another location, I knew I was good as dead. With the last of my strength, I screamed. I screamed and screamed and screamed. He was quick to slap a hand on my mouth, but it was too late. I don't know what good I'd done in my past life, because after all the people I murdered, I definitely didn't deserve this. But a blacked-out police cruiser had just rounded the corner in the parking garage, and it was heading directly towards us. Everything from this point forward is sort of spotty, but I do remember the sharp inhale of breath that Nick took before he abruptly dropped me. I rolled to the ground, my body almost completely paralyzed, as I listened to the officers scream at him to get on the ground. My vision swarmed in and out as I watched Nick zigzag back and forth. The last thing I heard before I passed out completely was a gunshot. When I finally came to, I was in a hospital bed. My parents were hovering over me, tears glistening in their eyes as they explained everything. Nick Peters was a very dangerous criminal who had quickly been convicted of many charges, but the largest of those was murder by poison. Apparently, I was very lucky to be alive. But what I was more excited about was the fact that Nick's crime was the perfect cover-up for what I'd done. It was almost sort of exhilarating. In all my years of poisoning people, I've never been caught. And the fact that I was teetering just on the edge this time was such an exhilarating rush. For the next few days, I laid in a hospital bed and recovered. I played the innocent victim, grieved the loss of my co-workers, and told the detectives everything that I knew. It wasn't much, but I gave them something to chew on, a little food for thought. I wasn't about to incriminate myself in any way, so I did what I do best. I tucked my blonde hair behind my ear, furrowed my brows, and played the pretty little damsel in distress. Everyone thought I was positively stupid anyways, so I channeled that and leaned into it. Serves everyone right for underestimating a pretty face. Everything was going smooth and butter when I made it home, so when I walked into my kitchen and saw a plate of cookies sitting on my island, you can only imagine the fear that raged through me when I noticed a note propped up beside them. With shaky hands, my fingers flicked open the paper, eyes scanning over the words before realization finally set in. Disbelief, denial, and then an overwhelming urge to vomit. Dearest Chrissy, Santa wanted me to send his regards. You might have convinced the detectives of your innocence, but we know what you did. You'll be our nihilist until the debt is paid. As for Nick, he'll be paying you a visit real soon. There are some of our own in the very police department that you think is protecting and serving you. We have eyes everywhere, ears everywhere. Don't believe me? Take a look at your Christmas tree for me. We left you a little gift of sorts. And while you're at it, have a cookie on us. Happy holidays. Talia Freeman. The note fell from my hand, spiraling to the floor. Talia, was she on this too? My heart pounded viciously in my chest as my eyes darted over to the festive lit tree in my living room, except this time, something was different. My legs trembled as I crept across the room, my eyes instantly zeroing in on the grisly scene before me. I was absolutely horrified and disgusted when I realized that every single one of my ornaments had been replaced. Various eyes and ears had been strung up and strategically placed on my tree. Skin dangled, torn, tattered, some of it stuck to the artificial evergreen needles. What terrified me the most was that the blood was still fresh. It dripped from the branches in a slow, steady stream. My eyes gradually traveled down, and that's when I saw it. My legs stumbled backwards before I doubled over and vomited. Underneath my tree sat one singular gift. I didn't dare open it. The words painted in crimson over the snow-white wrapping paper was enough to persuade me otherwise. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. My doctor told me taking the small yellow pill twice a day would make my daughter's horns disappear. She kept saying they made her feel sick, so I used a knife instead. And now the stories have come to an end. If you're still awake, well, I hope you fall asleep shortly. And the sounds that you're hearing in the background are going to take center stage for no more than 30 minutes to help you fall asleep or stay asleep. But if you are awake and want to hear more stories, I do have playlists for that as well. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.